Election night 1982. CBS News coverage continues. This portion is sponsored by Exxon Office Systems, where value is the most important word in word processing. Exxon Office Systems. And by Shearson American Express, the flagship of the financial world. Our financial consultants can turn your idle cash into working money. And now from CBS News election headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 8 p.m. in the East, and although the polls are still open in a lot of places, and we urge you by all means go out and vote, in terms of our coverage, this could be the most important hour, and here's why. It's a very big hour of power and decision, with polls closing in 17 states. For the Republicans, some of the toughest gubernatorial races, 3 big ones that they now hold. Will they keep them? We should find out this hour. For the Democrats, will some of their best-known Senate liberals make it for another term? Let's take a look. The polls closed in 12 states with Senate races at 8 o'clock. Based on our CBS News exit polling, we believe we can now say that the Democrats have won in 6 of those states, the Republicans in 1 of the states, and in 5 others, not enough significant returns yet. In Massachusetts, Senator Edward Kennedy, the Democrat, holds on to his seat against businessman Ray Shammy. Shammy spent a lot of money, but Kennedy wins in Massachusetts. In Maine, appointed Democratic Senator George Mitchell, on the basis of our exit polling, has won a Senate term in his own right by beating, at one time, one of the bright hopes of the Republicans, Congressman David Emory. Mitchell, on the basis of our exit polling, wins in Maine, an important hold-on for the Democrats. In Pennsylvania, an important hold-on for the Republicans, as expected. Senator John Hines of the Ketchup and Other Products family has beaten County Commissioner Cyril Wecht. Hines has won in Pennsylvania, a hold-on for the Republicans. In Maryland, Democratic Senator Paul Sarbanes, at one time considered very vulnerable by the Republicans, wins his Senate seat for another term, beating County Executive Lawrence Larry Hogan. Sarbanes wins in Maryland. In Michigan, Senator Donald Regal, Jr., once a Republican, now a Democrat, holds on to his Senate seat for the Democrats in Michigan. Michigan with the highest unemployment in the nation. Former Representative Philip Rupee has lost to Don Regal. The Democrats hold their seat in Michigan. In North Dakota, Senator Quentin Burdick has beaten Attorney Gene Knorr. This on the basis of our exit polling. Burdick wins in North Dakota, another hold on for the Democrats. In Tennessee, another of those places that the Republicans at one time thought oh boy, here's one we're going to win. They don't, not on the basis of our exit polling. Democratic Senator Jim Sasser has beaten Congressman Robert Beard in Tennessee. The Democrats hold on there as well. Now, at 8 o'clock, the polls closed in 12 states which have governor's races. And based on our CBS News exit polling, we can now say we believe that the Democrats have won in 5 of the states where the polls closed at 8 o'clock. The Republicans in 1 of those states. In the 6 other states, not enough returns yet to make calls. In Massachusetts, former Governor Michael Dukakis has beaten former City Councilman John W. Sears. This is a hold-on to a Democratic seat for the Democrats in Massachusetts, although Dukakis had beaten Democrat Ed King in the primary. Ed King, you may recall, was called Ronald Reagan's favorite Democratic mayor. Dukakis beat him in the primary, and now Dukakis returns to the State House as a Democrat in Massachusetts. In Connecticut, Governor William O'Neill, the incumbent Democrat. On the basis of our exit polling, we believe that it's safe to say O'Neill has won in Connecticut, beating the challenge of former State Senator Louis Rohn. In Maryland, Governor Harry Hughes, former University of Maryland baseball player, has beaten county executive and former Duke halfback Robert Pascoe. The Democrats hold on to their State House, the seat they held in Maryland. In Maine, in a race that was expected to be close, on the basis of our exit polling, Democratic Governor Joseph Brennan has beaten Attorney Charles Cragen. The Democrats hold on in Maine as well as in the other places we mentioned. In Tennessee, the Republicans hold on to their State House in Tennessee. Governor Lamar Alexander, the Republican, has beaten Knoxville Mayor Randy Tyree. Alexander and the Republicans win in Tennessee, a hold-on in Tennessee in a gubernatorial campaign. In Oklahoma, Governor George Nye, the Democrat, seeking to become the first man in history to hold 2 successive gubernatorial terms in Oklahoma. On the basis of our exit polling, he will do it. Nye, the Democrat, we believe, has beaten State Auditor Tom Daxon. Now, Among the states where the polls closed at 8 o'clock and where we can't make a judgment right now is, and this may surprise some of you, Pennsylvania, where Republican Governor Richard Thornburgh had supposedly been an overwhelming favorite over Democratic Congressman Alan Erdl. It's a little bit surprising that in that race, we are saying at this moment, although the polls have closed in Pennsylvania, we're going to have to take a look at some more precincts, some more information before we can make a call on that race. In Connecticut, state Republican Senator Lowell Weicker, a United States Senator, the maverick Republican in Connecticut, although Weicker is not Ronald Reagan's favorite kind of Republican, it's a state where the Republicans felt they had to hold on. Weicker appears to be a likely winner over Democratic Congressman Toby Moffett, but the exit poll shows the race very, very close, and too close to be sure. So there's one to watch. Connecticut, Lowell Weicker, the incumbent Republican senator, in a nip-and-tuck race with Toby Moffett. We'll have our eye on that one over the next few minutes. And in Michigan, another race for governor, Democrat James Blanchard looks ahead of his Republican challenger, Richard Headley. But again, we don't have enough significant information at the moment to make a decision as far as we're concerned in telling you what we believe and how that race will turn out. Well, Bob Schieffer, Edward Kennedy wins in Massachusetts, has to be happy about that. He's served 20 years in the Senate and seems poised now, if he chooses to do so, to make another race for the presidency.
Well, I think we'll have to wait and see, Dan, how he does, what his margin of victory is. That's what all the pollsters and all the consultants and all the people are going to talk about. How big did Kennedy win? After all, this is the first time that he has run since he has been separated from his wife. It's the first time he's had a well-financed candidate against him in a long time. But the issue there is Edward Kennedy. He's always been popular. Somebody said he could probably win wearing a cocktail dress, and certainly he's won tonight. Let's run through these other races quickly. In Maine, this is a big one for the Democrats. George Mitchell is the first, or is an appointed senator. Traditionally, appointed senators don't run well. And Mitchell has won up in Maine. In Michigan, Regal, one of those liberals that all the Republicans said would be very vulnerable. The Republican survey showed that he was among the top 5 Democrats who would be vulnerable this year, but he has won, and apparently won big. Unemployment is the real issue out there, Dan. We were out there in Detroit, and Coleman Young was talking at one rally and said, if you don't vote for the Democrats, if you don't vote right, people will get the idea you don't like, that you like being kicked around. That's how they were dealing with the unemployment issue out there. But Regal has won, and won in Michigan. In Maryland, another of the liberals who was supposed to be vulnerable this year, Paul Sarbanes, he was a big target of Nick Pack. They went in there early, and what they managed to do is galvanize the campaign for Sarbanes. He was able to raise a lot of money, running against one of the Republicans who had a hard time this year raising money, Larry Hogan, and that's kind of an oddity in this political year, a Republican who was short on funds. And I'm also told down in Tennessee, Dan, that Sasser has won. That, by far, one of the nastiest campaigns in the country. We'll be talking about that a little later tonight. Again, this was one of those Democrats that all the Republicans thought would be vulnerable. He got out, worked early. And also, we should say something about that win of Quentin Burdick out in North Dakota. You know, Dan, he was 74 years old. They tried to make an age an issue. He countered it by saying that he would fight anyone who thought he was too old to hold the office.
Well, and somebody said that he said he could still go 3 miles over brush and timber, and he'd fight anybody who thought he was too old.
That's it.
Leslie Stahl, we see some comeback winners tonight in these gubernatorial races. We have one in Massachusetts where Dukakis came back. We have one in Ohio where Celeste, who lost by less than 1% in his previous effort to be governor, wins tonight. So some of them are coming back in these gubernatorial campaigns.
And they're the liberals that are coming back, Dan. Dukakis, the Massachusetts voters threw him out 4 years ago for a conservative Democrat. This year they've thrown out the conservative. Dukakis beating John Sears, a Boston city councilman. Dukakis really won this race when he beat the conservative Democrat Ed King in the primary. Dukakis had a lot of help from Ted Kennedy in this race. Also in Tennessee, a very popular Republican governor holds on to his seat, Lamar Alexander. 75% approval rating as governor, even though unemployment in that state was 11.4%. His opponent, the mayor of Knoxville, Randy Tyree, tried to blame him for the unemployment, but he said it wasn't his fault, and the voters seem to agree with him. We have some more incumbents, Democrats, who are winning tonight in Maryland. The Democratic incumbent, Governor Harry Hughes, sailing to an easy second term over County Executive Bob Paschal, a businessman. In Maine, another popular Democratic incumbent, Joseph Brennan, who got through his first term without a single tax increase, had no problem winning against the lawyer Charles Cragen. Also in Connecticut, an old-fashioned Democratic, conservative Democrat and a tavern owner, William O'Neill, has won over Louis Rome, the Republican leader in the Senate. And in Oklahoma, George Nye is becoming the first governor to hold two consecutive terms, has beaten the Republican state auditor Tom Daxon. You mentioned before, Dan, that the race in Pennsylvania is closer than expected. The same thing is happening in Illinois, where the Republican incumbent, Jim Thompson, was expected to win quite easily over Senator Adlai Stevenson, who made a whole lot of mistakes in his campaign, but that race is unexpectedly close. We'll be watching it for the rest of the night, I think.
Well, certainly Pennsylvania and Illinois are now, if not the two most interesting gubernatorial races still out, among the more interesting races. I think we ought to say at this hour, Leslie, the Democrats have had things pretty much their way in the South and East and are beginning to have their way in the Midwest. Now, of course, the Midwest and the East, the South, the places where unemployment the highest, the Republicans have to be looking to the Rocky Mountain states and the West, where the returns will be coming in much later. They can still have a pretty good evening of it if they get started pretty quickly.
If they could win California and Texas, it wouldn't be a total loss for them.
Well, Bill Moyers, what's at stake for the Republican Party? We hear a lot said about what's at stake for Ronald Reagan, but what about the party?
A lot's at stake, Dan, for the party that's been struggling for years to become the majority party in this country. And of course, it depends on what finally happens. Traditionally, in all-fear elections, the verdict against an administration in power turns rather gentle. In 1962, with John Kennedy in the White House, the Democrats lost only 3 seats. In 1970, with Richard Nixon in the White House, the Republicans lost only 10 seats. In 1978, with an unpopular Jimmy Carter in the White House, the Democrats lost only 12 seats in the House. The Republicans need to hold their losses tonight to a minimum. And if the exit polls suggest that the Democrats are coming out in force and coming back in force, then that's bad news for the Republicans. 2 years ago, they thought that Ronald Reagan might do for them exactly what FDR had done for the Democratic Party in 1932, namely to make it the dominant party in this country for a generation to come. They won control of the Senate. They picked up 33 seats in the House. They had a popular president in the White House, and it looked as if that long-promised conservative majority might finally be emerging. But they've run into the problem that a small party faces. It's the problem that a small party has of retaining the loyalty of its own members and reaching out to the Democrats and independents and holding them. Take that 3rd district of Indiana that Bruce Morton was talking about a minute ago. It had been a traditionally Democratic district for years. In 1980, with Ronald Reagan getting something like 56% of the vote there, they beat the Democratic whip in the House, John Bradamus, and a young 27-year-old Republican took that seat. Now, the Republicans needed to hold that tonight if they hoped to make this trend continue. They lost it. They haven't been able, on the basis of the unpopularity so far in the exit polls of staying the course, to turn those gains in 1980 and to consolidate them into something formidable. Ironically, the very man that they thought could do it, a popular, personable, eloquent, on the stump, Ronald Reagan, may well have, by staying to the course, dealt them a blow in their hopes of becoming the dominant party in this country. It's too early. We have to be careful. But that's what's at stake. The Republicans are not out of this drama. If they lose tonight, even by a big vote, they've still got some very smart folks in the House and the Senate. And there's been all through this election the failure of the Democratic Party really to ignite the imagination of the people for their program as against the opposition and antipathy of people to Reagan. But the Republicans are still in it, but they've got to be worrying tonight about that consolidation.
And wouldn't you think, Bill, that the moderates in the Republican Party, if things continue as they've been going, with the Republicans taking losses in this election, the moderates in the Republican Party would have a strong argument of saying to Ronald Reagan and his advisors, you've taken the party too far right, you better get a little more toward the center.
Interesting to see whether or not the survivors in the Republican Party tonight are the conservatives who are up for election or the moderates. You also see a fight within the party tonight for the soul of the Republican Party.
We're watching those big gubernatorial races in Pennsylvania and Illinois and very tight Senate races in Vermont and Virginia, among others. More of our CBS News election night coverage in a moment. Let me point out one thing, that we're about a third of the races have been called, at least on the basis of exit polling by CBS News thus far. In 20 of the 23 races called so far, the Democrats have won. That does not, at least not yet, necessarily mean that it's a big loss for the Republicans, because again I remind you that in the lower Midwest, the Rocky Mountain states in the West, from which we do not have returns, where we don't have returns yet, those are expected to be the areas of Republican strength. So if you're pulling for the Republicans and you're saying to yourself, wow, this looks terrible, it certainly doesn't look good. No way to make it look good, but there are some very important races still out there to be decided. Bill Plant is at the White House. Bill, presumably President Reagan is watching this election very closely. What would you say is the administration's biggest fear? I know you want to talk about their hopes. What's their biggest fear?
I think their biggest fear, Dan, is that the president will come out of this election not looking like a winner. And that is the one thing that the White House wants most, that Ronald Reagan looked like a winner. And, you know, given the fact that the economy is in such bad shape, that could be difficult. And that's why it was a difficult decision for the political operation here to send the president out on the campaign trail where he could be the target. But they made that decision because the White House wanted to frame the issue rather than just react. They knew that the Democrats would be beating them over the head with the fairness question, with jobs, with Social Security. So Mr. Reagan went on the offensive. And since Labor Day, the president has traveled almost 20,000 miles on the campaign trail, although he almost never saw a major city. Air Force One did set down in 3 large states, but most of that travel was to smaller states. The reason? White House advisors wanted Mr. Reagan to stick to the places where he was still very popular, as in the West, or where Republicans seemed to be safe winners anyway, as in parts of North Carolina. And with one exception, Peoria, Illinois, they kept him away from areas of high unemployment. Some candidates were afraid of the effects of Reaganomics, and they pulled away, so there were states in which the president wasn't welcome. But the White House says that those presidential appearances did make a difference.
Bill, the New Jersey Senate race, I hate to interrupt you, but I know that you'll understand why. On our CBS News estimate, this is not an exit poll, on the basis of our CBS News estimate, that is actual votes in from sample precincts, we believe we can say that the winner in the New Jersey Senate race is the millionaire, businessman, high-tech entrepreneur Frank Lautenberg. On the basis of what we believe we know, Lautenberg has beaten Millicent Fenwick, the Republican congresswoman from New Jersey who once was heavily favored in that race. We believe that Lautenberg's winning percentage may be in the order of 54 to 46%. Now, we know that New Jersey is one of the most important states, one of those that I'm sure that when President Reagan hears this, that he will say to himself at the very least, shoot. Because New Jersey was a place, while there was a caretaker and appointed Republican senator there, this was the seat of Harrison Williams, and that a Democratic seat. The Republicans thought they had it won with Millicent Fenwick, but it looks like Lautenberg has won. Our CBS News estimate is that Lautenberg wins in New Jersey. Now, how important do you think that is to them? No way it can be good news for them.
Dan, up until a few days ago, they thought that race could go either way. They actually thought it was lost. But in the last couple of days, the White House thought that Millicent Fenwick had that race won. What they're going to say to us is that that fell right on that column of races that could go either way, and that they knew they were going to lose 1 or 2 of them. But you're right, it's bad news.
And Bill, if the Republicans are having trouble in a gubernatorial race in Pennsylvania where it was supposed to be easy going, and they lose New Jersey, where can they do well?
Well, Dan, they're going to have to look to the South and West. But the question is whether that'll be enough for them to hold their edge, their coalition in the House. We'll be talking about that later, I know. And most important of all, to these people here at the White House, the perception that Mr. Reagan can lead. That's the key.
Bill, we'll be coming back to you often, I hope. On Capitol Hill, Phil Jones is there tonight. Phil, the Democrats predicted tonight that they would pick up 2 Senate seats and 12 House seats. I want to say before I get to you, I'm just handed that here at CBS News, our CBS News estimate is that Senator Lloyd Bentsen, the veteran Democrat in Texas, has held on to his Senate seat, whipping Jim Collins, the Republican challenger there, and a favorite of Ronald Reagan, a man for whom Ronald Reagan campaigned. Our CBS News estimate is that when all the votes are in and counted, Lloyd Bentsen will have beaten Jim Collins. Now, we have less than a minute left, Bill, but how do the Democrats feel they're doing so far?
Well, it's hard to say. They've been watching the returns here as we have. But before the ballots were all in, they were putting out releases saying that if they picked up 12, that would be enough to really make some major changes in the president's economic program. So I think they had set the stage. Bruce Morton was suggesting earlier that how do you tell a winner when you get all the results in? Well, as far as the Democrats are concerned, in the House, they think that if they can get 12 votes, they will have a big impact.
Thank you very much, Phil Jones on Capitol Hill. The big news of this half hour so far, on the basis of a CBS News estimate, Frank Lautenberg, the Democrat, has won over Millicent Fenwick in New Jersey. Things are getting fairly wild out there. A lot of decisions coming in. We'll have them for you shortly. This is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York.
Election night, 1982. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 8:30 p.m. in the East. Again, the polls are still open in a lot of places. If you haven't voted, please go out and vote and then return to our coverage. If you have voted, stay with us because the story of this hour is this. The Democrats pick up a Senate seat in an upset, beating an unbeatable Republican star. On the gubernatorial front, what may be shaping up as the night of the comeback. Past Democrats returning to office in the state houses they used to hold. We'll know if another governor turned out. We'll be back in very shortly because the polls have just closed in Arkansas. They closed at 8:30 Eastern Time. And the third former governor that we were talking about, Bill Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar, and at one time a man who was talked about in terms of a possible presidential potential, seems likely to have won his comeback bid in the Razorback state. Based on our exit poll, Bill Clinton has probably defeated Governor Frank White, the Republican who took his job away 2 years ago. However, the margin is relatively narrow down there in Arkansas, and we're going to wait for some actual vote returns to come in before we say definitely that Clinton has beaten White. Now, they're playing what amounts to sudden death overtimes in Senate races, and that's where our focus has to be in Virginia, Vermont, and Illinois. If we can, let's look them over and give you some sense of how tight things are in a lot of important races. In Virginia, where Lieutenant Governor Dick Davis has been locked in a close duel with Republican Congressman Paul Tribble. The polls have been closed in Virginia for quite some time. This is with actually with 54% of the precincts reporting. We're not talking about exit polls or CBS News samples. We're talking about 54% of the precincts reporting. Look at how close it is in that Virginia race. This is a heart stopper. We talked a lot about numbers in the night. You have to think in terms of people. What it's doing to these two people, Paul Tribble, a young Republican whose future just lays out in front of him brightly if he can win this race. Dick Davis, who got more votes than even the Virginia Governor Chuck Robb in the last election. Look how close it is. Now, also, in Vermont. Vermont was a state where the Republicans felt they had a good chance to hold on, almost had to hold on. The Republican Senator Robert Stafford against the young Democrat James Guest, the national head of the Consumers Union, with 1% of the precincts reporting in Vermont. This is how close it is. Another race that is just simply cardiac arrest time. In Illinois, one of the Big Ten states, and a state in which there's been so much written and said about that governor's race there, was our own CBS News nomination for the worst of the gubernatorial races. A lot of people just found the stench from this race name-calling, and it got down so low, more than they could handle. But with 1% of the precincts in, from Illinois, you can see how close it is, 51% to 49% Thompson over Stevenson. Yes, only 1% of the precincts in and reporting, but because after looking at our exit polling and after looking at some of our sample precincts, we still have not called that race in Illinois, and on the basis of 1% of the precincts actually in and tabulated, it looks like it may be another heart thumper in Illinois in that governor's race. However, I'd have to say that right now, if you're at home and saying, well, I want the big picture, we said starting out that this was a national referendum on Reaganomics, among other things. And would the message to the president be, yes, stay the course, keep on doing what you're doing economically? Or would the message be, Mr. President, we like you personally, we want you to modify the course? Or would the message be, listen, jettison this thing, get rid of it, reverse it, and start with something else? Right now, on the basis of the way things have been going, the Democrats have an excellent chance to say when it's all said and done to the president, you've got to modify the course, and if things continue in the direction they're going, that is, if these patterns continue way out west, and particularly in California, the message to the president might very well wind up being reverse course. But the Republican strength is in the lower Midwest, the Rocky Mountain states in the west, particularly the Senate race and governor's race in California, a lot riding on those, so we've got a long way to go. For more on some of tonight's top races, Bob Schieffer. Bob, it's really getting exciting in these Senate races. Lautenberg beating Fenwick, I guess, is the best story we've got in terms of this hour.
I think that's right, and I'm also told, Dan, that William Roth has won the Senate race in Delaware. That's on the basis of an exit poll, I believe. That is fairly good news for the Republicans. No, it is an estimate. That is not on the basis of exit polling. Roth, of course, is the author of the Kemp-Roth bill, or the Roth-Kemp bill, as he calls it, the Reagan tax cut bill. He was not expected to have a hard time, and sure enough, he didn't. Adding on to what you talked about, Dan, I think that so far, I was just making some calculations here, we've had 33 Senate races up for grabs tonight. We've called 14 of them. We've had 11 Democrats, incumbents, who have won. 5 of those have been liberals. We've had 3 Republicans who have won now, only 3 who have won so far. 2 of them, Lugar and Hines, are the best candidates that the Republicans would agree that they had going tonight. They have not won by large margins. It is indeed early in the evening, but the signals so far are in the Democrats' favor. The Democrats who are winning tonight are winning by big margins. The Republicans who are winning are not winning by big margins. Let's go to some of those close races. Connecticut, Weicker and Moffitt locked in that race there. This is a race for the people, kind of the middle of the roaders. Moffitt has got to get the traditional Democrats away from Weicker, and so far you can see just how he's doing. The third-party candidate, the conservative there, at this point does not appear to be a factor. In Missouri, this is another real horse race. 2 of the best candidates in the country, in my view, Dan, Senator Danforth and Mrs. Woods. Danforth thought he had this one locked away a year ago. Mrs. Woods came out of nowhere and has run truly one of the best campaigns in the country. I think most of the consultants would agree on that. Up in Vermont, this is a seat that the Republicans considered a bit shaky. Stafford is getting on in years, but he campaigned hard, but he's getting a little better race up there than he was expected to get from the Democrat guest. This would be a big one if the Democrats could win. In Delaware, we talked about Roth just a moment ago, and down in Virginia, you talked about that. That's the race between Davis and Tribble. If Davis wins that race, Dan, you're going to see and hear a lot more of Chuck Robb, the governor, down there. Robb won. It was the Robb strategy in this race for Davis. It was the Robb organization. Of course, this is the seat that...
Election night 1982. CBS News coverage continues. This portion is sponsored by General Motors, makers of Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, Cadillac, and GMC truck. We're living up to the General Motors mark of excellence. And now from CBS News election headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 9 p.m. in the East, and things could change when the results begin coming in from the Rocky Mountain states and the West. But right now, the story is turnovers favoring the Democrats in the Midwest in governor's races. The Democrats have taken the state houses of Ohio and Michigan away from the Republicans. We should be getting decisions soon in Wisconsin and Minnesota. We're still awaiting results in Illinois and Nebraska. That Illinois governor's race looks very close. Unemployment is the key story of the evening thus far. The Democrats are being swept in on the shoulders of unemployment. The governorships in Ohio and Michigan, 2 good examples. 40% of the people asked at the polls today said unemployment was the key factor. Of those who said that unemployment was their #1 issue, they voted 3-1 Democratic. 25% said Social Security was their #1 concern, and of those, they voted 2-1 Democratic. Now, the drama right now hinges on 2 things. If you're asking yourself, well, is the president going to have to change his economic policy or not? The drama is in this United States Senate, where the Democrats still have a fighting chance to actually recapture control of the Senate. Doesn't look likely, but it is possible, particularly since the Democrats, Lautenberg, have won in New Jersey, and they're very close races indicated in Virginia and Vermont. Also, whatever the Republicans are going to do, they're going to have to do out west. Now, let's take a look at the places where the polls closed at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. The polls closed in 8 states which had Senate races. Based on our CBS News exit polling, we can now say the Democrats have won in 4 of those states. The Republicans took none of them. 4 other states still outstanding. In New York, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the liberal Democrat, will be returned to the Senate on the basis of our exit polling. State Assemblywoman and former schoolteacher Florence Sullivan goes down to defeat in New York. In Wisconsin, William Proxmire, who says he spent only $100 getting reelected on the basis of our exit polling, holds on to his Senate seat in Wisconsin, beating former State Senator Scott McCallum. In Nebraska, Senator Edward Zirinsky, who runs as a Democrat but who often votes with Ronald Reagan, is reelected over retired General James Keck. Zirinsky holds on to his Democratic Senate seat in Nebraska. In Arizona, Senator Dennis DeConcini has beaten State Representative Pete Dunn. The Democrats hold on to their Senate seat in Arizona. Now, at 9 o'clock, the polls closed in 10 states which had governor's races. And based on our CBS News exit polling, we can now say that the Democrats won 6 of those states. The Republicans won in 1. 3 other states, not enough returns in yet. In Rhode Island, Governor Joseph Garahy has beaten businessman Vincent Marzullo. The Democrats hold on to the state house in Rhode Island. In Minnesota, former Governor Ruby Perpich, the dentist from the Iron Range, the Democrat, takes up, this is a pickup for the Democrats in Minnesota. He has beaten businessman, investment banker Wheelock Whitney. Perpich, the Democrat, wins in Minnesota, takes that seat from the Republicans. Wisconsin, former State Assemblyman Anthony Tony Earl, the Democrat, has beaten businessman Tony Kohler. Earl and the Democrats win in Wisconsin, a pickup there since Dreyfus, the incumbent Republican, is retiring. In South Dakota, Governor William Janklow has beaten State Senator Michael O'Connor. The Republicans hold on to this state house in South Dakota. In Colorado, Democratic Governor Richard Dick Lamb has beaten former State Representative John Furr. Lamb and the Democrats hold on to the Colorado governorship. In Arizona, Governor Bruce Babbitt, the Democrat, has beaten 2 other candidates, State Senate President Leo Corbett and former Representative Sam Steiger, who was running as a Libertarian. But Babbitt, the Democrat, holds on, wins, keeps that state house in Arizona. And in Wyoming, veteran Governor Ed Herschler, who had a scare from oilman Warren Martin, Herschler, the Democrat, holds on to that state house in Wyoming. A word about exit polls. All of those returns on the basis of our exit polls. Throughout the day, CBS News asked voters how they voted in Senate and governor's races as they left the polls. There is a high probability that the people that we asked voted the way they told us they did. But exit polls can be imprecise, and if ours has been off in any way, thus far this hasn't happened, but if we find that we've been off in any way, we'll let you know right away if the actual votes suggest the contest is closer than expected. And of course, we have not, and we won't call any races in a state before the polls in that state have closed. Now, 2 very close races. You know, we keep saying throughout the evening, you have to think in terms of the human drama involved here. People pour themselves into these races, and when it gets to be so very, very close, it adds not only to the excitement, but also the human drama. Democratic Lieutenant Governor Mary Cuomo of New York, Mario Cuomo in New York, leads Republican businessman Lou Lehrman in the race for governor, but the margin in our exit poll is not quite enough to be sure. So there's one we'll be keeping an eye on. Cuomo, the Democrat, was heavily favored, and we do have an indication that he's leading. In Minnesota, Mark Dayton, the Democrat who spent $7 million of his money running for the Senate, also appears from our exit poll to have failed. Appeared is the operative word there. Dayton's opponent is the Republican incumbent David Dernberger. We'll have more on that later. We are not calling that race as yet, although the indication is that Dernberger leads. Bruce Morton, one of the big stories of the night, the makeup of the new House. What's it look like now?
Dan, the makeup of the new House tempts me to ring 5 bells and yell bulletin. We do now have, for the first time, a CBS News estimate. And that estimate is that when all the votes are counted in all the districts, the new House will look like this. 277 Democrats, 158 Republicans. Plus or minus, the statisticians say 10 seats. That's a gain for the Democrats. A gain for the Democrats of 34 seats, if we're right on the money.
Wow.
Even with the 10-seat give or take, the worst they could do in that estimate is to gain 24, 25 seats, and that would be a stunning switch, way out of the historical average and much more than they were saying they needed to establish effective policy control in the new House. A couple of individual races within there. We have some responsibility for famous faces, I guess. And there was a famous face on the line in Tennessee. Sissy Baker, the daughter of the Republican Senate leader Howard Baker, ran for a new district there and lost. Lost decisively, as you can see, to James Cooper, who's something of a famous name himself. His father was a governor of Tennessee back in the 1940s, but that was a long time ago. Mr. Cooper's partisans say with some justification he did this one all by himself. And in Delaware, another interesting race, Thomas Evans, the incumbent Republican congressman, only congressman in the state, has lost to Tom Carper, popular state treasurer. That was an issue clouded or featured or illustrated or whatever you want to call it by a lobbyist named Paula Parkinson, who once posed nude for Playboy magazine. She allowed us how she'd carried on some with Mr. Evans, and he had voted her way on a bill. He denied that his vote was influenced, did confess to some carryings on and asked forgiveness of the Lord, but apparently not of the voters of Delaware, so he's in a little trouble. If you look around for why we seem to be having such a very big swing in the House, it's kind of easy. We asked people on our national exit poll if their votes for a member of Congress were meant as a referendum on President Reagan. And by and large, they said yes, and by and large, they said that they were voting against President Reagan. And finally, we asked Mr. Reagan's basic message, do you want to stay the course or not? And people narrowly, but by a few points, said no, they wanted to change.
Bruce, very quickly, if our CBS News estimate is correct and the new House has 277 Democrats for a pickup of 36 seats, the president's economic policy, the whole policy, not just modifying it, a reversal certainly would be possible, would it not?
Oh, sure. That's not just stay the course, that's stop engines, abandon ship, yeah.
We'll have more CBS News coverage of Election Night 1982 in just a moment. Bob Schieffer, we were just looking at tonight's arithmetic, and when we say, and there's no particular joy in saying this, we're reading the facts as we know them, that so far the Democrats have done very well. You've been doing some mathematics, and how well have they been doing?
Well, you add this on to what Bruce Morton just said, that they look like now they're going to win 34 or 35 seats in the House. As of 9 o'clock, it's 9:10 now here in the East. When we started this hour, there were 20 Democratic seats up. The Democrats had already won 15 of those seats. 15 of the 20 they started the evening with. There were 13 Republican seats up. The Republicans have won 3 so far and lost 1 so far. Yet to call where the polls have already closed: Virginia, Vermont, Connecticut, Missouri, Minnesota, New Mexico, Rhode Island, and Wyoming. All of those are Republican seats, all of them close.
If the president's going to be able to hold on to his economic policy, if he's going to stay the course, he's got to do it in the West. Mike Wallace, who's been covering the money story of this political campaign, the most expensive off-year election campaign in American history, maybe the most expensive campaign, period. Mike, we're always reminded that Will Rogers once said that politics has got so expensive it takes a lot of money to get beat with, and that's certainly true tonight. A lot of these people have more money than Tom Mix had hats.
Well, it used to be that politicians started out in log cabins, poor folks trying to do good. But all of the candidates that we're about to show you are millionaires.
Take California congressional candidate, Republican Johnny Creen. He makes lots of travel trailers for lots of money, and he is spending over $1 million, more than half of it his own, on his campaign for Congress, producing commercials in which Buddy Ebsen tells voters just how much Creen wants to go to Washington and help out Ronald Reagan.
Johnny Creen doesn't expect the president to solve our problems alone. Johnny knows we all have to sacrifice to make the president's programs work.
Johnny Creen for Congress. It's another vote for the president.
But Johnny Creen's a piker compared to this man.
I believe Minnesota needs a champion in Washington.
Democratic candidate for Senate, 35-year-old Mark Dayton is a millionaire who depicts himself as just one of us.
One man running for the U.S. Senate has been traveling throughout Minnesota for 16 months, hearing our people call for jobs and understanding and a fair chance.
Mark Dayton is heir to the Dayton-Hudson department store fortune. And to gild that lily, he is also married to a Rockefeller. The merger, some say, enabled Dayton to spend more than $6.5 million of his own to try to get elected. But even that sounds skimpy when you contemplate the dollars put up by this man, Lou Lehrman, Republican candidate for governor in New York. A person, as he likes to remind us, of modest heritage.
All of my immigrant grandparents landed right here in New York at Ellis Island, and they made their way in American life from scratch.
Well, one of those immigrant grandparents made it big, starting a business that became Rite Aid Pharmacies, a multi-million-dollar discount chain that has given Lehrman the wherewithal to spend almost $12 million, $7.5 million of that his own money, to try to land a job that will pay $100,000 a year.
Lou Lehrman for governor.
And finally, we'd like you to meet this man.
I'm Tom Hayden, and like all parents, I've had my share of pain and happiness.
Tom Hayden, the 1960s radical, the husband of Jane Fonda, has raised $1.5 million, much of it Jane's, to run for assemblyman. That's right, assemblyman in California. It costs that much, you see, because Hayden's got this 60s image to live down.
But it's not always easy. A few people continue to focus on the past.
Your mother's scum. Get out.
But with $1.5 million, perhaps you can buy yourself a new image.
And I'm still committed to building a better future for all of us.
Now, Dan, Tom Hayden, of course, is a surrogate millionaire. But he and Lou Lehrman and the rest of them may be spending a lot, but they are not alone. 22 House candidates have raised more than $500,000 each. 30 Senate candidates have raised more than $1 million each. And we're going to be back later in the evening to see how much difference money actually has made in today's election.
Well, Mike, we've been talking about the Republican money in this race, but the Democrats are not exactly going around barefooted in these races.
New York Senate race. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, 2-2, $2,200,000. Florence Sullivan, his opponent, spent $75,000. Frank Lautenberg spent $3.7 million in New Jersey. Millicent Fenwick spent about $2 million.
Lautenberg won that race.
Correct. Oh, these are all winners, all Democratic winners. Lloyd Bentsen, $4 million against Jim Collins, $2 million in Texas. The Democrat won. Robert Byrd, $1.7 million. Cleve Benedict, the P&G heir, spent a mere $1 million against him. So the Democrats, obviously, Howard Metzenbaum, $3.5 million. His opponent, $600,000, his Republican opponent. So Charles Manat may talk about the fact that the Republican expenditures were obscene in this campaign. The fact remains that the Democrats have done exceedingly well, at least in the Senate, in raising and spending millions and millions of dollars.
You can answer the Democrats' letter when they write us one, which I'm sure they will. We'll have more CBS News coverage of campaign election night 1982 in a moment. Things continue to look, at the very minimum, not good for the Republicans as of this hour, between 9 and 10 o'clock Eastern Time. Our CBS News estimate is the Democrats may pick up 35, 36 seats in the House of Representatives. So far, they have a net gain of 1 in the Senate. You remember we started the evening with the Senate 54-46 in favor of the Republicans. It's possible, just possible, the Democrats could regain control of the Senate. Some big Senate races still out, including Virginia, Vermont, Missouri, New Mexico. There's a long way to go. The Republicans have to be saying, we got to do it in the West. Now, we were talking about big money with Mike Wallace a few moments ago. Big money has another and different kind of effect on this election and another dimension. Things have been looking up in the stock market, a big day there today, and we want to go to Jane Bryant Quinn, but just before we do so, in the Arkansas governor's race, one of the most closely contested gubernatorial campaigns in the country, our CBS News estimate is now that the Democrat, Bill Clinton, will, after all is said and done, have beaten Frank White, the incumbent Republican governor of Arkansas and the man who replaced Clinton, by on the order of 54 to 46%. Clinton, a former Rhodes Scholar, appears to have recaptured the State House in Arkansas for the Democrats, and there's no other way to say it except that up to and including now, the Democrats continue to roll, particularly in the gubernatorial races, but almost as significantly in the Senate races, although there are a lot of Senate races still out. Now, let's go to Jane Bryant Quinn, who is on Wall Street with some of the leaders of the financial community, or at least people who know an awful lot about it. Jane, good evening to you, and good evening to everyone there.
Hello, Dan. To see what Wall Street thinks about this election, we've gathered some people who keep a very sharp eye on the stock market. First, we have Bob Farrell, who is the chief market analyst and vice president of Merrill Lynch. Eleanor Moore manages large amounts of money for individuals and pension funds. Ed Yardeni is chief economist, senior vice president of Prudential-based securities, and And Michael Metz, sorry, Mike, is a market strategist and senior vice president of Oppenheimer and Company. As you have all seen in watching these results, we have a Democratic trend so far, 35 to 36 seats estimated in the House. And I want to ask you if this worries you, if a Democratic win would make a difference to the stock market or the economy long term.
It doesn't worry me at all. I think the Democrats are not the big spenders they used to be. I think the victory probably means lower defense spending, probably maintaining entitlements, and probably higher consumption taxes, all of which I think are positive.
Ed, does this worry you?
It worries me a bit from the point of view the Republicans have been saying we have to stay the course. Many Democrats have been saying we need a mid-course correction. If we get a gridlock between Congress and the President and we lose our course, then I'd become worried.
By a gridlock, you simply mean that they won't be able to agree on anything?
Yes, we won't have any consensus on what policy we need. Then we really won't know what course we want to change or what course we want to follow.
Bob, let me ask you, what happens to the stock market out of this election?
The stock market runs on expectations. I think that a very positive Democratic victory here really puts the general assumption now that there'll be bigger spending, and this concern, I think, will put the market down short term.
Very quickly, are you going to change your investment policy tomorrow because of these results?
No, I'm not going to change the investment policy, although I will be concerned more longer term about Democratic spending.
Thank you very much, Dan. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Jane Bryant Quinn. Good news for the Republicans, and it's been a long while since they've had any, in Minnesota in the Senate race. David Durenberger, the Republican incumbent in Minnesota, on the basis of our CBS News estimate, has beaten Mark Dayton, the department store heir. Dayton stores, as well as they have a nationwide string of bookstores. Durenberger, the Republican, appears to have held on to his seat in Minnesota, and one can hear the sighs from the White House reverberating out practically all over the country, because there's one the Democrats just simply had to hold on to. This is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York.
Election night 1982. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 9:30 p.m. in the East, and if you think of politics as drama, and you should, because there's a lot of drama in politics, and like a lot of things in life, it has a clear-cut ending to the drama. We are moving in now to Act 3, the final act of this drama, because the focus is moving to the Rocky Mountain states and the West. This is gut check time for the Republicans, because so far the Democrats have picked up many more seats in the House of Representatives than had been generally expected. Our CBS News estimate that the Democrats will pick up on the order of 35, 36 congressional seats in the House of Representatives. The Democrats have done very well in Senate races so far, very well in gubernatorial races so far. In the governor's races, just as one example, the Democrats had 20 seats up so far. They've won 14, lost none, with 6 still to be decided. The Republicans had 16 governor's races up so far. They have won in 3. They've lost in 5, with 8 to be decided. In the Senate, the Democrats won a big one in New Jersey. Frank Lautenberg, the Democrat, beating Millicent Fenwick there. The Republicans now are looking to the West. The polls are closing in Nevada and Montana. And the Republicans, to cinch their hold on the Senate, they figure to pick up some seats there. They hope they can pick them up there. The House effectively is gone for support of Ronald Reagan's economic policies. The question now is, do the Republicans hold on to the Senate? Now, in the Vermont governor's race, the Democrats have held on. Incumbent Democratic Governor Richard Snelling has beaten Madeleine Kunin, the former television producer, in the Vermont governor's race, with 12% of the precincts reporting. Those are the actual vote counts, but our CBS News estimate is that Snelling, the Republican, I hope I didn't misspeak myself on this, Snelling, the Republican, an incumbent in Vermont, has won there. So far tonight, the incumbents have won everywhere except in the Arkansas governor's race, where Frank White, the incumbent Republican governor, was beaten by Bill Clinton. That's the only place all night where an incumbent has lost so far. Now, Bob Schieffer, the Senate win by incumbent David Durenberger in Minnesota is very good news for the Republicans, but I'm remembering that Durenberger is not exactly Ronald Reagan's favorite Republican senator anyway.
David Durenberger is the man who called the president's new federalism program baloney. He was the man who said publicly, when asked if Reagan had been out there to campaign for him, said yes, he'd been out here early, and that seemed to work out fine. I believe the president came out there in February. The interesting thing about this, Dan, looking over the exit polling, is The number one issue out there, according to our exit poll, was the quality of the candidates. Just about a third of the people polled said that was the most important thing. What do these two guys really like? And of that group, 72% of them voted for Durenberger. So this is something the White House can be glad they got a vote for the Senate, but there's not much else they can say about it. And this fits in with everything we've been hearing from Bruce Morton and everything else we've been hearing tonight.
But not to put too fine a point on it, the president has to be saying to himself and his aides saying, look, we've got to hold on in the Senate, and all right, Durenberger is not exactly their kind of Republican. However, he is a Republican vote in the Senate, and this is a blow to the Democrats' hope for recapturing the Senate. No question about it.
Well, absolutely, because every vote that the Republicans have determines who's going to be in the majority, and the majority determines who will be the committee chairman.
One thing I want to make very explicitly clear is that when we say I hope I said earlier that the polls will soon be closing in Nevada and Montana. They'll be closing out there in less than a half-hour Eastern time. There's still time to vote in a lot of states, including Nevada and Montana. If you haven't voted, we encourage you, we beg you, please go to the polls and vote, and then come back and watch our coverage. California, just to mention one state, the polls.
This portion of Election 82 is brought to you.
Election night 1982. From CBS News election headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It's 10:30 Eastern Time with a reminder to those of you in the West where the polls are still open, you still have a half hour to get to the polls. If you're in line at the polls when they close, you get to vote. We encourage you once again to please go to the polls and vote, and then come back and watch our coverage. 49 races have been decided so far, we think, here at CBS News. 20 races still to go, including California, where there's a big gubernatorial race and a big Senate race. It could come down to California in a lot of ways. We're seeing the passing of the Proposition 13 era in a way. Gone are Proposition 13 fever candidates in Arkansas, Massachusetts, Nevada, Wisconsin, Minnesota. New governors won the jobs in those places. The Democrats believe that their coalition is clearly coming home. Social Security retirees who voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980 are now going for the Democrats, according to the Democrats' own analysis. The Republicans don't believe that. In the governor's races, we have bonfire hot races in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Texas, the California race still out. Polls not even closed there. Senate races galore. Virginia, the Republicans have a very good chance to pick up a Senate seat, which they need to do now. In Virginia, the race there is so close. In Rhode Island, a tight race indicated. Missouri, Vermont. If you're asking why we at CBS News have not yet called the governor's races in such places as Pennsylvania and New York, here's the reason. We're pretty conservative. Warren Matofsky and the others who keep track of such things for us, they see that Thornburg, yes, he probably will win in Pennsylvania. Cuomo probably will win in New York, but we simply think it's too early to say that. Bob Schieffer, one of the better pieces of news for the Republicans was the returning of Lowell Weicker. Even if he is a maverick, he's a Republican, and the Democrats have picked up a net gain of 2 in the Senate. And with things that close in the Senate, I would think that the Republicans would be very relieved for Weicker to win that race.
Howard Baker, the majority leader for the Republicans in the Senate, will be happy to get every vote he can get, especially now. One of the reasons he went to Connecticut and campaigned for Weicker. He knew it was going to be very close, and indeed it was. This was a crucial one for the Republicans. It was in Connecticut, Dan, that the Democrats simply was unable to make the Democratic issues work as other Democrats have made them work tonight. One of the reasons, of course, is that Lowell Weicker is a Republican who votes like a Democrat. Let's whip through some of these other close races out in New Mexico. This was the big win for the Democrats out there. Harrison Schmitt, the former astronaut, lost tonight to the Attorney General out there, Jeff Bingaman. I was out there, Dan, and I knew Schmitt was in some trouble when I talked to him about would it help if Ronald Reagan comes out here. And he said, I think he could be of most help out around Roswell. Well, most of the population, 1/3 of the population of New Mexico is in Albuquerque. So that had to tell you that Reaganomics was not working out there. Bingaman knew it wasn't, and he stressed the economy in a state that had high unemployment, and it worked for him. Out in Montana, the incumbent Jake Melcher has won out there. This was one of the ones, Dan, that the Democrats were a little worried about. There was a strong conservative, the Nick Pack outfit went in out there against Melcher. It did not work. He ran a very effective campaign against them. He too stressed the economy, and he has won tonight. And I must say that Melcher ran, Dan, my favorite commercial of the whole campaign. He is
talking cows.
The one candidate who had cows on his side, or said he did, and we're going to show it. Here it is. Let's look at it.
For over a year now, a pack of East Coast politicos have been scurrying into Montana with briefcases full of money, trying to convince us our Senator Melcher is out of step. Montana isn't buying it, especially those who know bull when they hear it.
Did you hear about those city slickers out here bad-mouthing Doc Melcher? One of them was stepping in what they've been trying to sell. He kept calling me a steer. That'll all come as some surprise to Junior there.
There it is, Dan. Moo cows for Melcher. He is the only veterinarian in the Senate, too, by the way.
Well, you know, what can you say?
There's not much to say about that.
The amazing thing is it seems to have worked. That Melcher did seem to be in trouble before that that particular commercial began working for him out there. You know, what can one say? This is the most expensive Congress, Senate, and House that money can buy. So a lot of the money went for commercials of that kind. Leslie, the Republicans are fighting a very close race in Texas, trying to hold on to their state house there. I haven't heard anything about that. Do you have anything on it?
Well, I can tell you that it's a case again where a lot of money is being spent on the Republican side, William Clements. It'll be a test there of whether money, he's spending about $12 million, can overcome a huge Democratic get-out-the-vote drive. Organized labor never worked harder in Texas to assure that the regular Democrats come out. Something that Clements did this time that kind of have some of the Democrats in the state smirking. Last time, 4 years ago, he won by cutting into the conservative Democrats constituency, but Mark White, the Attorney General, is a conservative Democrat himself. And so William Clements decided to go after the Hispanic vote to make up for the conservative Democrats he expects to lose. And he's going after them because Mark White came out against extending the Voting Rights Act. And Clements has run a commercial linking himself to John F. Kennedy and LBJ in order to attract Hispanics. Let's see it.
Go ahead.
Okay, let's try and see the commercial if we can. Can we?
Well, let's hope we can.
Well, if we can't, I will tell you that you see Clements along with JFK and LBJ supporting voting rights, and the question is, who's the one politician around who didn't? And it's, of course, Mark White, and he's hoping to pick up that vote, but we are unable to tell you right now whether he's doing well there. There is a substantial gender gap. We haven't been talking too much about this alleged gender gap. In some of our states, it has developed, and Texas is one of them. Clements is doing substantially better with men, Mark White with women. The gender gap, however, is not showing up in another state where the race is quite close, and that's Illinois. Jim Thompson was expected to win that race quite easily, particularly after Senator Adlai Stevenson announced, to everyone's stunning surprise, that he was not a wimp. What was so incredible about that was that no one had even ever accused him of being a wimp. Sort of took over the campaign, but nevertheless, Adlai Stevenson is doing quite well tonight. That race is very close. With 44% of the precincts reporting, you can see that Stevenson's 56% of the vote, but that is not significant because so few of the precincts are in. The CBS News estimate shows it much closer than that, and Stevenson is again attracting the traditional Democrats, getting them to the polls.
Leslie, I'm reminded when we see that commercial for Clements didn't come up, as our audience probably realizes, we have a lot of computer-driven graphics on this broadcast, and as the Old Farmer's Almanac says, to err is to human, is human, but to really foul up, it takes a computer. I also want to point out that while it said winner under Clements, as we showed a picture of him, that CBS News has not called that Texas governor's race. That was a slip on our part. Yes, we make mistakes sometimes. It's a slip on our part when you saw that picture of Clements up with the word winner underneath him. I think everyone will agree that both Mark White and Governor Clements are winners as people, but as regards this race tonight, we've not yet called that one. We'll have more CBS News coverage of Election Night 1982 in a moment. Yes, it is true that CBS News has not, at least not yet, said that there are winners in the gubernatorial races in Pennsylvania, Illinois, and Texas. One reason is that we're cautious. We have in mind the race between James Rhodes, the now retiring Republican governor in Ohio, and Richard Celeste, who won tonight in his gubernatorial race. But in the last governor's race in Ohio, we remember all too well that virtually everyone had said that Celeste had won. This is when he was running against Rhodes. And even James Rhodes himself went to bed believing that he'd lost. He woke up the next morning, found out that he'd won the race, and he said ever since, listen, CBS News was the only one that said that I had a chance, and I'll never forget it. Now, this year, by the way, Rhodes called a friend of his and said, a Republican friend of his, and says, listen, it's going to be bad out there. Get in the weeds. Better get down. Better get your head down. Better hide, because it's really going to be rugged. Well, it's too early to say that it's been all that tough on the Republicans tonight. They still have some very important races to be decided out in the West, where President Reagan campaigned vigorously, and they could come back some. In Vermont, this is good news for the Republicans. And you now see the Republicans coming back. Big win. Impossible to overstate this one. Republican incumbent senator in Vermont, Robert Stafford. Our CBS News estimate is that he has held off the challenge of James Guest, the former aide to Ted Kennedy. We think that Stafford's final winning margin will be on the order of 54 to 46%. This is not on the basis of exit polls. This is on the basis of a CBS News estimate on sample precincts and votes actually in and counted. Stafford, the Republican, wins a big one in Vermont. And what that probably means, what we say may mean, that the Democrats have been stopped in their effort to regain control of the Senate. Yes, in Vermont, the race has been decided. In Virginia, Missouri, to name two very tight races that haven't been decided, and keeping in mind that the Democrats picked up a Senate seat in New Mexico, it is still possible for the Democrats to regain control of the Senate, but Stafford's big win in Vermont makes that less likely than it was before. Now, the reasons that Stafford won: he convinced people that he could do more for Vermont. He's chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee, chairman of the Education Subcommittee. He was a moderate Republican running in a moderate Republican state, and he avoided being tied to the Reagan economic policies. Bruce Morton, we haven't touched base. Well, hold on just one second. Bruce, I know that our latest CBS News estimate is in the House of Representatives that the Democrats will probably pick up on the order of 31 seats in the House. But right now, yet another potential Democratic presidential aspirant watching tonight's results, I say yet another because a lot of them are, is Senator John Glenn in Columbus, Ohio. He's the guest now of Walter Cronkite. Walter and John Glenn.
Hello, Senator. Good to be talking to you.
Walter, how are you? Glad to talk to you again.
Thank you. Good to be talking to you. Tell me, what do you Democrats plan to do now to get your act together for 1984? Who are you going to look to, and what kind of a group are you going to try to put together to get a program here? You've won a lot of important races, but you're still without a program.
Won a lot of important races, and I was glad to hear that prediction just a moment ago of 31 in the House, because I think that's very definitely a message. Had we won just the predicted 11 or 12 or something like that, it would have been a little bit different. But you know, Walter, I think we had much more of a program over this past year than most people gave us credit for. We wanted to go with a much smaller tax cut, one targeted toward business, job creation, job employment, maintaining investment. Had we gone with that, I think the economy would be in much better shape today than it has been in the past. But I think in some respects this year, I don't like to see the negative campaigning. I think that was a major factor this year. We spent too much time looking back. I think what we need to do, as you suggest, turn around now, look to the future, start building the country we can, education, R&D, all of these things we've been talking about in this campaign. We need to really put that together now for the next couple of years.
Can you do that when the leadership of the party, or part of it, Mondale, Kennedy, Glenn, Cranston, are all out trying to look after number one and get in a position for the 1984 nomination? Well,
I think we're all going to be looking out for the country first, and that should be our number one interest as United States Senators, and I'm sure we'll be doing exactly that. These programs are things we can work on in the Senate as well as being out talking about them around the country. The economics of the country are something that I think the people are speaking out on tonight. They're not satisfied with it. That's evident in the whole voting pattern that's going on this evening. And we're not only going to try and reverse some of that economic policy of the country, but we're also going to try and set some of these agendas for the future that are going to make or break where this country is going to be 10 or 15 or 20 years down the road. Those things have been little addressed this year. I think it's important we set that agenda for the future.
Senator, a White House source told me this afternoon that he thought the president would try to stay the course regardless of what the returns were tonight. It didn't matter how large they were on the Democratic side if that's the way it turned out. And yet, Senator Dole, I think, is suggesting that the Republican leadership in the Senate are going to have to take control and mid-course correct whether the president wants to do that or not. Do you think that's a possibility on the Republican side in the Senate?
Yes, I do, because we saw this last year in the Senate, Walter. We saw when the president would not back off on this 1/4 reduction over a 3-year period in taxes that put us into such a huge deficit position, record deficits. We're going to add half again to the whole national debt in 3 years with this policy. Republican leadership in the Senate, I think, took a responsible move. And when they couldn't convince the president to back off on that tax cut, they went ahead and put in a whole additional tax increase. Now, when we talk about stay the course that the president insists on, and let me say the president got behind that tax increase finally too and supported it. So when we talk about stay the course, is it the tax cut policy? Is it the tax increase policy? What is the policy for the future for the economics of this country? But I think we also need to address the educational needs, the research needs for the country so that we don't find ourselves second best with regard to Japan, Germany, France, others in the future for the time period when our children and grandchildren will be looking for jobs in this country. We can still be the leadership in this world.
Do you see a possibility that President Reagan will dig in his heels and there will be, as another White House source mentioned, a possibly government by veto, that there'll be a stalemate, in other words, between the executive and the legislative branch?
Well, I sincerely hope that that does not happen, and I hope if the president is watching any of the programs, watching this program tonight, I hope we can work together. I honestly do. Whether I run for anything in this life or not other than where I am right now, I really hope for the future of this country that we reverse some of these economic policies that have given us such huge unemployment here in Ohio and across this country. We don't want to see that go on. Record farm failures, record business failures. A program that did not result in the business euphoria and the business expansion the president talked about when he was selling that tax increase, or tax decrease, I'm sorry. Now, we really have to reverse some of those policies. We're heading toward a cliff, and I think it's responsible leadership in the Senate that can bring us all together.
Thank you very much, Senator Glenn. Good to talk to you tonight.
Thank you, Walter.
Right. Dan, it's back to you.
Thank you very much, Walter Cronkite and John Glenn. We'll have more CBS News coverage of Election Night 1982 in a moment. The polls will be closing in about 12 minutes in California, Washington, and Hawaii. If you haven't voted and you're eligible to vote, get to the polls, then come back and watch our coverage. CBS News estimates that at least 64 million people voted today, 38% of those over the voting age of 18. This is about the same as 4 years ago, the last off-year election, and slightly less than in 1974. Bruce Morton, big money is being spent in nearly all of the House races, but perhaps none more than in one of those Massachusetts races being called the most expensive congressional race of all time.
Well, I think it probably is, Dan. It's the 4th district in Massachusetts. That's Fall River, the suburbs outside of Boston, and it's pitted two incumbents, Democrat Barney Frank and Republican Margaret Heckler, against each other. Frank spent over $1 million. Heckler spent over $600,000. Money paid off in this case. Frank campaigned very aggressively, painted Heckler as a Reagan clone, insisted that she was a down-the-line Reagan supporter, not representative of the people in the district. A lot of industrial towns there and a lot of unemployment. She claimed that she was independent and unbought, but that, as you can see, didn't take. In Missouri's 5th district, Richard Bowling's old district, Democrat Alan Wheat has defeated a moderate Republican, John Sharp. The district was Democratic forever, nothing new there, except that Alan Wheat is a black. The first black elected from that district, obviously, in a long time. And he will be, I think, only the second black member of Congress representing a mostly white district. So he had to do that by coalition building, and he's gone ahead and done it. In Ohio, a former Carter administration aide, Marcy Kaptur, has beaten a freshman Republican. Ed Weber, that was the kind of seat the Republicans had to keep. If your freshmen do a good job and do well at constituent service, even if they're new to the district, they can usually stay in. Mr. Weber did not stay in, and that's a loss for the Republicans. On the other hand, they've gained a seat in Connecticut's 6th district. That's New Britain, and that's the district Toby Moffett gave up when he ran for the Senate. Nancy Johnson, a state senator who has always done well in Democratic New Britain, did well again. She will be the new congresswoman from the 6th district, beating another state senator, Democrat Bill Curry. And finally, Dan, one race we have all been watching, Bob Michaels' fight, the Republican leader's fight out in Illinois. He's running against Doug Stevens, a lawyer. That's very close. About 25% of the vote is in, and they're really neck and neck. No way to call it. Michaels' people had been saying they thought he'd pulled away a little this past week, but maybe not.
And the president went out there to try to pull that out for Bob Michaels, so we'll continue to watch that race very closely. Let's recap where we stand just before 11 o'clock Eastern Time. There are a lot of races still outstanding. The Senate race in Virginia and the Senate race in Missouri, to name 2. But let's recap a little. Let's go here and see just exactly where we are in the time that we have left to tell you. As we started the day, in the Senate, there were 33 races to be decided. Of those, the Democrats have won 18, the Republicans have won 8, remaining to be decided 7, including the one in California. Senate seats gained, the Democrats 2. As of right now, it'd be 52-48 in the Senate. Governor's races, 36 races decided today. The Democrats have won 21, the Republicans have won 4, 11 gubernatorial races yet to be decided, including Illinois and Texas. So far, the Democrats have picked up 5 state houses. Quickly in the House of Representatives, all 435 seats. Our CBS News estimate is the Democrats will wind up with 274, the Republicans 161. This is Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York.
Chicano is that it's moderately high, 74% turnout overall in Los Angeles to this hour. So I think we can look for some real effect from those 2 minorities here.
Terry, one other question, then we want to go to Bob Simon in Chicago, but while we don't have enough figures that we want to pass along to people in terms of saying we'll call one of those California races, has anybody out there called either one of the races?
I've been talking to you for most of the time since the polls closed here, and certainly no one in California would ever call a race before the polls closed. Remember, that's a sensitive issue out here in the West. Not to my knowledge, no.
Well, as well, it should be a sensitive issue, and as we've said so many times this evening, we don't mind having the reputation for being a little cautious on these calls, and certainly in California, where it figures to be close, we'll be watching it closely, but we'll be cautious about it. In the Midwest, the Republicans had hoped to defuse the unemployment issue and stay the course. Bob Simon in Chicago, 1, how successful have the Republicans been, and 2, what about that cinch-strap-tight race between Thompson and Stevenson?
Well, Dan, so far the big surprise is that Stevenson is doing as well as he is. We haven't called it yet. There's no way to call it. It's a cliffhanger. But so far the big surprise in the Midwest is that this is the region where unemployment has devastated entire states. It's the region where Reaganomics has eclipsed every other issue. It's the region where the Democrats expected to make their most dramatic gains. And while Democrats are doing well here, as they're doing all over the country, our exit polls are telling us that Midwesterners are saying unequivocally, stay the course, believe it or not. A clear majority told our pollsters that they believe Reagan's economic program will eventually help the country. And this is far different from any other region in the nation. More Midwesterners are saying that. And who do they blame for their problems? They blame the Democrats, once again, by an overwhelming majority. And also, if there were any doubt as to Mr. Reagan's personal popularity here, 49% of Midwesterners polled wants him to run again. Now, 49% might not sound like a very startling or encouraging figure, but it's a better score than Mr. Reagan has gotten anywhere else in the country. Bear in mind, Dan, that all the Democratic victories announced so far in the Midwest were expected. There have been no Democratic upsets, and there have been no Republican upsets either. In fact, Midwesterners might be distressed to learn that so far they've behaved exactly the way they were expected to behave, exactly the way pollsters predicted they would behave, with one possible exception. That is, the faith that so many have expressed in Reaganomics. Some might call it the Midwestern quality of perseverance. Others might say that Midwesterners are behaving as stubbornly as a Missouri mule.
Bob, from the Midwest, our CBS News estimate now is that Terry Branstad, the Republican candidate and hope to succeed the retiring Republican governor of Iowa, Robert Ray, has probably won that race over the Democrat Roxanne Conlon. We think that when it's all over in Iowa, that Branstad, the Republican, will win on the order of having a margin of 53%. Roxanne Conlon, one-time Democrat, was heavily favored there, but she started talking about the fact that she'd taken a lot of tax shelters, was forced to reveal that, and she never quite recovered from that. So Branstad, the Republican, holds on to that Republican gubernatorial state house in Iowa.
Dan, this is a race where the pundits in Des Moines were saying that the race would be won by whoever did not make the last mistake after Mrs. Conlon's uncalled for revelation of her tax situation, the fact that she paid no state taxes at all. Mr. Branstad was doing terribly well in the race until he announced to a Right to Life convention that he would use his inaugural as an occasion for a Right to Life fundraiser. This brought Mrs. Conlon back, and she was feeling so good about that a few weeks later that she announced publicly that the people of Iowa had forgiven her for the fact that she hadn't paid any state taxes, and while in fact the issue had been pretty much forgotten, it revived it. It looks like Mrs. Conlon made the last mistake, and she lost.
We've talked a lot about Social Security as an issue, Bob, in addition to unemployment. Bill Moyers was saying before the election day that Social Security might turn out to be an issue second only to unemployment. And the largest group of senior citizens that we have tonight is with Linda Douglas out in Sun City, Arizona. Linda, you've been watching the returns and talking with these people there. Tell us what they're thinking, what's on their minds.
Well, Dan, as you may know, our exit polling shows that 48% of the senior citizens, that is the people over 60 who voted in the election today, said that Social Security is the most important issue to them. And I'd like to start off by asking Flora Seedorf, who is 79 years old, a retired office manager from Chicago, a registered Democrat. Why is Social Security of such concern to the elderly, given that your benefits have not been cut, given that each of the parties says they won't cut your benefits? Why do you worry? Why are you concerned?
We're very concerned about where it's going. The proposed cut, one of them is the cost of living. And as small as it might be, it will hurt if we don't have it. And for another thing, I think that if they would have Social Security for those that pay into it, and take the other programs out, and take the general fund, pay them, but leave Social Security for those that have paid it.
But do you, as a person who is dependent upon Social Security, feel financially vulnerable? Do you feel like Social Security, the benefits, make you vulnerable?
Yes, they do. Right now, Social Security, as far as I am concerned, will last about 3 weeks of the month. And the last week, I've got to go into savings. And the savings can only go so far, and then they're gone.
So Flora is worried that her benefits might be in jeopardy. I want to ask Doug Morris, who is 72 years old and is a registered Republican, if you worry that the benefits will be cut, perhaps under the Ronald Reagan administration, as the Democrats have been saying they will be.
You bet anybody on fixed income has got to be concerned about that, because we can't moonlight, we can't add to our income. We came here with whatever the income is, and if that's cut, and Social Security is an important part of that, that then doesn't become a matter of choice with us. That becomes a vital part of our living. And a cut in Social Security means a cut in lifestyle.
I want to ask about one more issue, because our exit polling is also showing that 31% of the elderly are also voting on the issue of unemployment, somewhat unusual since most of the elderly that we've talked to may be retired, at least many of them. Let me ask Chester Gadomski, who is 69 years old and a registered Democrat, why do you worry about unemployment, given that you yourself are retired?
Well, I'm worried about it because people on Social Security sometimes have to work to supplement their Social Security. Jobs are scarce to get. I worry about my sons, my children, who they seem to be complaining now for the first time since they've been on their own. One son is laying off people. He hates to do it, but that's the way the trend is in Memphis. Things are kind of slow. My other boy, the same thing. He tells me now that he's doing much better, he has to lay people off. And it hurts them to do this. It hurts all of us, because I can think of the days in the Depression when everything was happening to me. People get worried. They think about their children. And in places where people are retired, now what do? They got to help their children out, because some of them aren't working. And they say, I remember the days when, and this thing is like snowballing. So what happens? You blame Reaganomics, you blame most everybody that you can find fault with. And it's not that it's everybody's fault, but we have to do something. So we try and grasp at things, and we say, well, let's try something else. And that's what we're doing right now. We're trying something else, and maybe it'll work out for us, and I hope so.
Linda Douglas.
Okay.
Linda, I'm very
much.
sorry to interrupt you there, and I do hope that you'll thank everyone there, and we may be able to get back to you, but you'll understand why I'm interrupting. If you're a Republican and you found yourself during the evening saying, man, I want to party, now's the time to party, because in Virginia, the Republicans have won on the basis of a CBS News estimate. Paul Tribble, the young Republican hopeful in Virginia, 35-year-old congressman, but even at 35, a veteran of the United States Congress, has beaten, on the basis of our CBS News estimate. This race was tight all night long, but we believe that Tribble has won this race, that his margin will be about 51%. Now, Bob Schieffer, the Democrats had it good early in the South and in the East, but here's a stopper for the Republicans.
It's a big stopper because,
to me, it says that the Republicans
what it means,
hold on
Dan,
to the
is
Senate.
the numbers, the Democrats, whatever else happens tonight, the Democrats are not going to control the Senate. There's still to be decided the race in California, the race in Rhode Island, the race in Missouri, the race in Nevada. There are only 4 seats left. The Republicans would have had to win all 5 of those races to take control of the Senate, and now they have lost in Virginia. So it means that we may wind up with a tie. It may be 50-50 with Vice President Bush casting the deciding vote. It may wind up, well, who knows what, but it's not going to be a Democratic Senate.
Bill Moyes, I've been thinking about this for some while. Paul Tribble winning in Virginia on the basis of our CBS News estimate. The Republicans have lost a number of congressional seats. We think it'll be on the order of 31, somewhere in that area. But holding on to the Senate, even with a reduced margin in the Senate, it could work to their advantage. Certainly, Senator Howard Baker might be able to get better party discipline if it's 52-48 for the Republicans as opposed to 54-46.
No question about it. This race is proving to produce results with more threads in it than a Persian rug, Dan, and it's going to be a while before we can identify and separate them. But it's going to be a very difficult, straining time on the American body politic in the next 2 years. Here you have these older people, and 28%, according to our exit poll, of the total vote tonight is among older people, and that's about 8 percentage points above what's usual, saying, you know, we want to save our Social Security. Here you have Democrats winning where they should have won, because they're usually the party of employment, and they're winning in high unemployment states. You have the Republicans coming in conservative states like Virginia. They're going to do better out west than many people think. So you're going to have a very mixed tapestry here. It's going to put a strain on the system. Question: does Ronald Reagan play the defiant president with a small lead in the Senate, fighting the Democrats in the House? Or does he, like Eisenhower, when the Democrats control both the House and the Senate, move toward a more pragmatic policy? John Glenn said it earlier today, this country has some deep structural problems. And the question is, do the two parties cooperate on them, or do they fight like hens in the backyard?
Among the Senate races that we're watching very closely now, the one in Missouri, Danforth, the Republican incumbent, against Woods there. We'll have more for you just after your local stations. In the meantime, Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York.
Election night 1982. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and I know you've been listening for a long time, perhaps, and watching for a long time, and you're saying to yourself, well, I don't know whether I should can it and pick up in the newspapers tomorrow morning or stay with it. Stay with it. This dance of democracy, not to overstate it, but that's what it is coming right down to the end. The Republicans have fought back in the last couple of hours. The California races are outstanding, and some big races are beginning to drop. Here's what I mean. In Texas, our CBS News estimate is that White wins. Mark White, the young Attorney General, has unseated the Republican governor of Texas, Bill Clements. We think White's winning margin will be on the order of 53%. Keep in mind that Clements spent about $15 million in a losing campaign for the Texas governorship. In New York, yes, we held off on this one, wanted to be cautious. We believe that Mario Cuomo has won over Lou Lehrman, the millionaire drugstore man who fought an indefatigable race. And Lehrman got almost everybody's respect in the race. It was much closer than a lot of people thought it might be, but we believe that Cuomo's winning margin in New York will be on the order of 51%. Cuomo holds on to a Democratic state house. Hugh Carey, the Democratic governor of New York, retiring. That's the sort of thing you're going to be seeing over the next hour, hour and a half. The Republicans took some shellackings early on in the early returns from the South and East and in the Midwest. They've started to come back in the Senate races. Yes, they lost the Texas governorship. They've had a bad night in the governorships. They've not had a good night in the House. But if the Republicans win both of those races in California, a lot of that early stuff will be forgotten. President Reagan will be claiming that it was a very good night for him. Leslie Stahl, the story of this half hour up to and including now, New York, Cuomo wins. In Texas, Mark White, the Democrat, unseats the Republican Clements.
Let's look at how those two Democrats did it. First, in New York, in the state of New York, Mario Cuomo seems to have won by racking up huge margins in the city. However, his opponent, a supply-side Republican, Louis Lehrman, did very well everywhere else in the state. Cuomo ran a very ethnic campaign, trying to convince voters that he was the candidate, the average man running against a very wealthy candidate, making that a big issue. Crime was also an issue. The death penalty, Lehrman supported it, Cuomo against it. But polls consistently showed that jobs and the economy were the main issue on the voters' minds in New York. Mario Cuomo and Louis Lehrman ran the kind of campaign that everybody wishes everyone would run. They really talked about issues. Cuomo, a liberal Democrat, against a real supply-side conservative Republican, and the liberal Democrat has won in the state of New York. In Texas, it was a case again of a Democrat against a conservative Republican, but in this case, Mark White, the Attorney General, who, according to our CBS estimate, will win with about 53% of the vote, was a conservative Democrat and seems to have won by not only pulling out traditional Democrats, liberals, Hispanics, blacks, but also by capturing the conservative Democrats in the state. Bill Clements was the first Republican governor of Texas since Reconstruction, and he had won last time by getting those conservatives. Clements himself a big issue in the campaign because of his blunt speaking style and because he seemed to represent pro-business interests in the state. Mark White, a big upset. Ronald Reagan campaigned in Texas for Bill Clements. A big loss for the Republicans tonight. You know, the convention, the Republican convention, is going to be in Dallas, and the White House was hoping that Bill Clements was going to be the host. It's going to be a little strange having a Democratic governor as the host of the Republican convention.
Well, Leslie, I have to think that the honeydew factor in Texas, while it didn't win for Bill Clements, it did keep him close. And here's what I mean. Rita Clements, Governor Clements' wife, was in that campaign from the word go, right at his side, helping him, saying to him quietly, honey, do this, honey, do that. And Bill Clements did it, and that was one of the reasons he hung close with Mark White as long as he did.
He also hung close by spending $12 million, an extraordinary amount of money.
Well, you say 12. I think when it's all in total, it'll be closer to 15.
And by
Be yourself is the worst advice some people can give themselves, and that's what happened to Bill Clements.
Well, Bill, in Pennsylvania,
Dan.
Hold on.
Go ahead.
Did you have the Thornburg race? Go ahead if you do.
Okay, we have.
Rave on.
We have finally at last popular Republican incumbent in Pennsylvania, Richard Thornburg, according to our CBS News estimate, winning. The estimate is that he will win by 59% of the vote. A very popular governor, won his stripes over the 3 Mile Island incident. Sorry, 49%. 49, no, 59%. I'm a little confused. I think he's going to win whatever the...
Well, Leslie, it's easy to get confused, but let's pause for 1 second. We think Thornburg will win the race on the order of 51% to 49%.
Okay, thank you. 51%. Well, then that's closer than we had expected because he came into this race with everyone saying he was going to have it easy. He ran against a Democrat who pounded away on the Reaganomics theme, had nothing else to run on. His name was not even known in the state. His name is Alan Erdl, but no one in the state could pronounce it. And just by pounding away on that one theme, jobs, he managed to come up pretty close to a very popular Republican, but the Republicans do hold on nevertheless in Pennsylvania.
Well, Leslie, I think everybody can understand why at this hour of the night, and with as many of these gubernatorial races you've had to cover, a little slight confusion certainly we can all understand. Even in my mind, Texas, Mark White, the Democrat, has picked it up from Bill Clements, the Republican. Pennsylvania, Thornburg, the Republican, in a closer than expected race, holds on. Illinois, that close remains tight. California, still out. It may be a while before we know. In New York, Cuomo has won. Now, Bob Schieffer, none of this, these results in these gubernatorial races, obscures that big Republican victory in Virginia, Paul Tribble coming on there. I wonder, Chuck Robb, the Democratic governor in Virginia, has been thinking of himself as a future Republican hopeful. He's now got some competition. I would think young Paul Tribble will be talked about as a possible future presidential potential.
Well, I'm not sure you can talk about Tribble yet, but I think Tribble is going to be very glad to win this victory. This was one that was very close all the way. Dan, let me just throw one little thing into the mix on this Clements-White race down in Texas. Leslie will be interested in this. I talked to a friend of mine down there today, and I said, who did you contribute to? Who did you make a contribution to in the campaign? He said, and he's a conservative Democrat, and he said, oh, I had to contribute to Clements. And I said, well, what are you going to do if Mark White wins? He said, oh, it's very simple. He said, I'll head up the Make Up with Mark committee. So we may see a Make Up with Mark committee down there. That was a tough one.
Well, you know, Mike Wallace made a good point earlier. The Democrats have been poor-mouthing about money, but certainly they weren't short of money in Texas. Yes, Clements, the gubernatorial candidate, had plenty of money. He's what's called in Texas a unit player being one whose personal wealth is $100 million or more, and Clements was widely thought of as being a unit player down there. But Lloyd Benson, you have to figure that Lloyd Benson, well-organized, extremely well-financed, helped pull Mark White along in his winning gubernatorial race, an uphill race.
I think if there's anybody that the Republicans are going to hang the goat horns on this time, it's going to be Jim Collins, the man who decided to run against Lloyd Benson and decided to run against him as a liberal, tried to picture Lloyd Benson as a liberal, which I'm sure came off as sort of silly because Lloyd Benson is not a liberal, but what he did do, it caused Benson to go out and raise an enormous amount of money. He bought a lot of things like voter registration lists, what used to call poll tax lists, they don't have a poll tax anymore, things that identify Democratic voters, where they are, the kinds of things, the scientific things, polls and things like that that the Republicans had before, and now the Democrats had them, and there's no question that a big win by Benson, a big Democratic turnout, had a lot to do with the governor's race.
Bruce Morton, in the House, the makeup of the new House at this hour looks like it will be roughly what?
Looks like a gain of 29 seats for the Democrats, which is handsome. Let me just, there are a couple of results here that are really just kind of for politics junkies, just really interesting stuff. You remember I'm sorry, you wanted to?
I think we have to, Bruce. We'll catch it on the backside. I have to say, CBS News coverage of the 1982 elections with Bruce Morton will continue in a moment. Sorry about that. The Republicans continue on their way back in Rhode Island. This is a race that has gone right down to the wire. Our CBS News estimate is that moderate Republican Senator John Chafee has won in Rhode Island, whipping Julius Michelson, the former Attorney General and a labor lawyer. We think that Chafee's margin will be 51%, but we can well believe that he'll take it, the Republicans will take it, and Ronald Reagan will take it. The Republicans hold on to another Senate seat that becomes increasingly important to them. The Democrats have a net gain of 2 in the Senate. Right now, if things stopped right now, which they don't, of course, if a chicken had longer wings, he could fly and all that, but if they stopped right now, in the Senate, it would be a 52-48 Republican Senate. But remember, if the Republicans win in California, they'll consider their night a great big success. whether they win the Senate race or the gubernatorial race. Between the two, they'd probably rather have the Senate race. But Chafee wins in Rhode Island. And we're watching two close races out in California, don't forget. And at the grassroots level, our old friend Charles Girault is in Walnut Creek, California, at a polling place there. Charlie, it's night now.
Yeah, it is, and we've had the very satisfying experience, Dan, of spending 13 hours actually watching people vote. This is garage, as you can see. The polls have closed now, so it's just back to being the McDowell's Garage on Rock Oak Road. But yesterday, a fireman named Steve Pollock came around here and turned it for one day into an outpost of democracy. Steve Pollock is the man who sets up the voting booths in this part of Walnut Creek, and he turned a lot of ordinary places yesterday into special places.
Well, I had 5 schools, 2 libraries, a couple of swim clubs places, and the rest, yeah, one church, a Baptist church over here on Walnut Avenue, and the rest houses.
Like Mrs. McDowell's Garage?
Right, like Mrs. McDowell's Garage.
You've been doing this a long time?
Yeah, 22 years.
And why do you do it?
Like to get the vote out so people wouldn't have no excuse. And being a public servant, when you're asked to do it,
Steve Pollock has the right idea, of course. It takes a little work to keep democracy alive. While Steve and his son-in-law, Richard Dooley, hung the curtains on the voting booths, Margaret McDowell moved the bikes out of the garage to make room for the voters, and her son Bob brought in a big cardboard box, ordinary carton, transformed into an icon of freedom by 2 words printed on it: ballot box. It's kind of a nuisance to you. Why do you bother with it?
Well, now that I'm working, I get to see my neighbors.
A chance to see the neighbors, or a good excuse for tidying up the garage. Really, it is much more than that. We found it to be somehow inspiring when, at exactly 7 o'clock this morning at 230 Rock Oak Road, Margaret McDowell lifted her garage door to find 5 neighbors waiting. She said to them, "The polls are open." She walked out and put up the flag, and the thing had begun. This infinitely important thing, which has now been going on all day amid the fire logs and the picnic hampers and the weed killer, the things people keep in garages. And a Honda motorbike young Bob McDowell is trying to sell. He's not asking much, but it needs a new clutch. And Dan, if you multiply this little ritual of democracy by 173,000, the number of precincts in America, you get an idea, really, of the power of this thing we have all experienced today, a national election.
Charlie, my friend John Thompson, the basketball coach at Georgetown College, wants to know if you can dunk in that bucket right behind you.
It's 1/2 foot lower than a regulation basket. Bob McDowell said he put it up that way on purpose.
We'll have more CBS News coverage of Election Night 1982 in a moment. As things now stand, with the Republicans winning the Senate seat in Virginia, Paul Tribble winning there and picking up a seat for the Republicans, if things stop right now, it would be 53-47 for the Republicans in the Senate, but there's still that very big California race outstanding. It can't be a tie. If the Democrats won everything outstanding, they could still win control of the Senate. Check me on that, Bob Schieffer, or is that incorrect?
No.
If the Democrats won everything outstanding.
From here on, we'd wind up with 49 Democrats and 51
So it's
Republicans.
assured that the Republicans will have control of the Senate. It may be shaky, but they'd have control.
And there will not be a tie.
Okay. 2 years ago, NCPAC, the National Conservative Political Action Committee, managed to rid the Senate of 4 big liberal names, rid being their word: McGovern, By, Church, and Culver. So we've been watching tonight to see how NCPAC fared with
a couple of grace notes within that for politics junkies. You may remember Eugene Atkinson, a congressman from the suburbs outside Pittsburgh, who stood in the Rose Garden, announced, "I am no longer a Democrat, I'm converting to the Republican Party," was embraced by President Reagan, and was the talk of Washington and the talk of the district. But in the district, they were saying bad things. He lost today to Joe Coulter, state legislator who was a labor's choice in the district and will be the new congressman. A brash young Republican from Long Island named John LeBoutillier shepherded Atkinson through that conversion. He was the fastest lip in the House. He compared Speaker O'Neill to the federal government, big, fat, and out of control. He called his fellow Republican Charles Percy a wimp. Lots of wimps in Illinois. I don't know how that happens, Leslie. Anyway, LeBoutillier went up before the voters today, and he lost, beaten in his Long Island district by Robert Mrazek, a county official. So he won't be around next time. Speaker O'Neill, the man LeBoutillier had such fun baiting, is back, of course. There's really not much suspense in that. The Speaker had an opponent this time, Frank McNamara, who actually spent a decent amount of money, but O'Neill, surprise, surprise, won easily. And finally, Dan, one development of profound significance that I'm a little hesitant to get into here. Two television anchormen ran tonight for Congress. They both lost. I don't know what that means.
Well, that's one of those lines I'm not about to touch with a 12-foot pole, which is what I reserve for things I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Bruce, you have to think that Tip O'Neill, the House Majority Leader for the Democrats, is feeling pretty good tonight. He's been in the House since Trigger was a colt. The question is, can he, with these kinds of figures going for the Democrats, can he force President Reagan to reverse his economic policy, or will it be a case of simply trying to get the president to modify his policy?
Well, I think that's going to have to be issue to issue. And the Democrats don't have a policy right now. There's no leader of the opposition who can say, right, we won all these seats, we're now going to do A, B, C, and D. They will disagree about what they want to do. Bill Moyers said earlier that there's a mandate, but we don't know quite for what. No question, if they can find a course on which most mainstream Democrats can agree, they can make it very tough for the president to fight it.
Bill Moyers, what would you guess? And we're guessing here, but we're trying to get to, what does all this election stuff mean? We're beginning to get enough results in. If the Democrats in the House can pull themselves together on one issue and take it to President Reagan on that issue, what would you guess that to be?
I think it'll be on defense spending. They want to cut it, not a great deal, but enough to do that, and they'll want to do something about that third year of tax increase. But no Democrat's going to want to go to the public in '84 having voted for a tax increase. It's going to be tough.
We'll be back in a moment with more CBS News election coverage. Well, that noise you perhaps heard, the popping of champagne corks in and around the White House, because in California, in the Senate race out there, our CBS News estimate is that Pete Wilson, the mayor of San Diego, not only has beaten Jerry Brown, the retiring Democratic governor of California, but perhaps has beaten him by a wider margin than was generally thought might be the case. Pete Wilson, on the basis of our CBS News estimate, I emphasize this is with votes actually in and counted in sample precincts. Pete Wilson will be the new Republican governor of California. Remember, this is a hold-on for the Republicans. S.I. Hayakawa retiring from that Senate seat. Pete Wilson managed to make the campaign a referendum on Jerry Brown, rather than having it be a referendum on Reaganomics, as Jerry Brown tried to make it. Jerry Brown had a lot of negatives, an anti-Brown vote out there, the Brown nuclear freeze ad, now famous or notorious depending on your point of view, television ad backfired. The issues broke badly for Brown, his handling of the Medfly scare in California, a crime, his alleged anti-freeway stance, the fact that Jerry Brown was seen to many Californians always to be running for president, all that built up. Pete Wilson, a fine, articulate Republican candidate out there, was on the defensive for a while. Brown had momentum going for him, but when it's all said and done, it looks like not only has Pete Wilson won in California, but his lead looks longer than your average well rope out there, and he seems to have won that race easily. No, we do not have figures that we can call on yet in the important California gubernatorial race. Now, the White House, of course, has been watching results such as this in these last couple of hours and taking some not only solace from it, relief, and I think some joy from those races. Jim Baker, who is the President's Chief of Staff, is with Walter Cronkite now in our Washington studios. Walter and Jim Baker, good evening.
Good evening, Dan.
Jim, is the President up?
President's very up. Oh, you mean is he up? Has he retired for the night?
Has he retired for the night?
Well, when I left the residence about an hour ago, the President was very upbeat, and he'd been following returns since they first started at 7 o'clock. I rather suspect that he's probably still watching.
Dan was speculating that he'd be waiting for that California Senate race.
That's an important race to him.
He can go to bed now exceedingly happy, I take it.
Yes, indeed.
We'd had you on a couple of hours ago or so. We'd have been talking about what was looked like a building, if not landslide, a very heavy loss for the Republicans. In the last couple of hours, things have come back to a balance now in the Senate. Right now, you're perhaps losing a net of 1. But that even could change with 4 major races. I'll say, well, you're not. Now, wait, yes, you are still 1.
That's correct,
down.
because that was an incumbent seat for him.
That's right. But in the House, it still looks like a bigger margin than was being predicted. And Bruce Morton was speculating a moment ago that this could force some legislative decisions, perhaps, on the President. Would you agree that the House, with that kind of a increased Democratic margin, would have that kind of leverage?
Well, I would not agree that it was that a 25-seat loss, and I understand you're projecting 29. Other networks are projecting the range of 25 is bigger than we had anticipated. Our numbers, as you probably know, had been 17 to 27, something in that range. I also think that a pickup, even if it's 29 seats, would not give the Democrats a coalition in the House for a return to the tax spend policies that we'd seen there before when they dominated both houses of the Congress. The question is going to be whether or not the President is able to pull together his coalition in the House from time to time, and we really think that he will be able to do that. It'll be a lot tougher than it was before, but on selected votes and on selected issues, we think we will be able to pull that coalition back together in the House. The number 1 priority for us in this campaign was to keep that Senate. That was extremely important, and we are very pleased with the results so far. And with only 2 races out, I guess Nevada and Missouri, we'll do no worse than lose 2, and we might break even.
Earlier, Howard Baker, the Republican leader in the Senate, had said that unless you gain some seats in the Senate this time, you're going to have a little problem in 84 and 86 because of the balance of seats that will be up for grabs at that time. Do you think that you're going to be in trouble in the Senate? 84?
Well, I hope not. What Howard was saying is true in the sense that this time we got 20 Democrats running and only 12 Republicans. Next time that's going to be reversed, so it'll be tougher for us in 2 years. I don't think we ever felt that there was the likelihood or the prospect of a gain beyond, say, 2 seats. We did feel at one point 2 or 3 weeks ago that we might have a shot at picking up 2 seats. We'll be very happy if we can hold our own in the Senate or even lose just 1, because in the off year, normally the party in power loses by tradition and history 2 seats.
Jim, what about the President's own pulling power this year? He campaigned for 23 governors or senators, I believe, and of the 15 of the decisions in so far, he's won 5 and lost 10 of those. There's still 15 yet out, I believe. I may have my numbers a little bit short right now, but that's roughly the way it's going, 2 to 1 against him. He campaigned for 7 North Carolina congressmen, and 2 of them have lost, 2 are losing, and the others are doubtful. It doesn't speak very well for his power as a campaigner for others.
Well, most of the President's campaigning was for senatorial candidates, and if you assume that we're doing better than history and tradition teach us we should do in the Senate, then I think it might speak well for what the President was able to do. We did not, in determining where the President went, we did not sit down and say, let's see what a good score we can build up for the President. The President didn't go in and campaign for Dick Lugar in Indiana, a clear winner in the Senate. There were a number of races like that where we were asked to go in, where we could have gone in, but we didn't go in because where we sent the President, where the President went, was where it might make a difference, and those were in the close races, the tough races.
What do you think the effect of these returns will have on the President's decision to run in '84?
Well, I think had we lost the Senate, the President might have been tempted to take a look at government by veto, which would have been the necessary result of that for the next 2 years, and maybe say, gosh, is it worth it? I think the president wants to run again. He hasn't made a decision yet, but I think as long as his health holds that he'll probably run again. And I certainly don't think he's going to be unduly disappointed by these results tonight. As far as the governor's races are concerned, it looks like we're going to lose somewhere between 5 or 7 governorships, which is exactly what we thought we would lose by reason of some retirements of Republican governors, particularly in the Midwest. And again, that's consistent with what losses have been in the off years. Nixon lost 10 in 70. I think Ford lost 5 or 6 in 74, and Carter lost 6 or 7 in 78. So there's nothing there's no landslide here. There's nothing out of the ordinary.
And you don't see any mandate that would change the president's course?
No, I don't.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Yes, sir.
Dan?
And thank you very much, Walter Cronkite. Will Tom Bradley, the mayor of Los Angeles, become the first black governor of California and the first elected black governor in this country? We don't know yet. We'll have more of our CBS News election coverage in a moment. Well, Pete Wilson appears to have beaten Jerry Brown in the California Senate race. They're taking no prisoners in the Senate races in Missouri and Nevada, not if you read the returns, because both of those races breathtakingly close. In the New York governor's race, our CBS News estimate has been that Mario Cuomo has beaten Louis Lehrman, the Republican, by 51 to 49%. This race was too wild for the West and too fast for the movies in terms of money spent, in terms of charges made against one another. And this gives you an indication of just how bitterly fought it was. Morton Dean, our CBS News correspondent, reports that there are indications that Lou Lehrman will not concede the New York gubernatorial race, but may seek a recount. Now, that's not for certain, but that's Morton Dean says that there are indications that may happen. It was a race in which tremendous sums of money were spent, including about $4 or $5 million of Lou Lehrman's own money. Throughout the evening, Mike Wallace has been explaining how big money worked in this election, the most expensive off-year election of all time, and perhaps the most expensive election of all time, bar none. It's such a big story this year that Andrew Rooney has also been keeping an eye on the cash box. Andy?
Dan, there's been so much talk about money tonight, you'd think we were covering a football game or a baseball game. I'm just amazed at all the money the candidates spent this year. Makes me nervous to think a political office is worth that much. Louis Lehrman, you say, spent $7 million of his drugstore money trying to get to be governor of New York. Why would anyone want to be governor of New York that bad? I'd pay $7 million not to be governor of New York. Mark Dayton spent $6.5 million of his family's department store money trying to get to be senator from Minnesota. $6.5 million, that's a lot of ladies' lingerie, and he lost. I think most Americans hope the candidate who spends the most money loses. I know I do. On the other hand, of course, you figure that if a rich candidate gets elected, he won't have to steal. I was looking at the 1980 election figures. Of the 10 candidates who spent the most money trying to get elected to the Senate, 5 of them lost. I like that. It proves money can't buy bluebirds. The losers always have a hard time paying off their campaign debts, of course, after the election, because no one wants to help them anymore. I don't worry about them. What I worry about is how the winners pay off their debts, Dan.
Well, I got to tell you, Andrew, I don't have any idea how they'd pay off theirs, but you have to believe that a fellow like Bill Clements, the
I
Republican
think you have
governor,
some idea how they do it, Dan.
that Clements spending maybe $15 million, he's got to feel that he's been rode hard and put away wet to spend $15 million and lose the race.
How would you like to go to bed with that tonight?
There's a line I won't touch either. Thank you, Andy. We'll try to get back to you a little more later. Bob Cheever, the Brown-Wilson Senate race. Wilson the winner, one of the big ones.
Sure was. And talking about money, here's a campaign where the two candidates together spent $7 million just on television commercials. $7 million just on television commercials. This was a case, clearly, Dan, where Jerry Brown just started this campaign with a lot of baggage. He got himself out of a hole with some kind of interesting TV commercials in the beginning. It said commercials that started out, well, you think Jerry Brown's awful, take another look. He rose in the polls as Pete Wilson made some mistakes, but in the end, the negatives just caught up with him. Wilson came on to win.
Bob, with Wilson winning that race, and our CBS News estimate is that he may have won with a winning percentage of maybe close to 54%. While we haven't called the race, that can't be good news for Tom Bradley, the Los Angeles mayor who's trying to become governor in his race with George Deukmejian.
No, that's not. And, you know, that's an interesting thing because that brings the whole question of the black vote. And I just had a piece of paper. It's what I was just reaching for here. I read a while ago, and I remember I made a note on it. In California, Brown and Bradley carried the black vote by 78 and 84% respectively. However, in Brown's last run for governor in 78, he got 93% of the black vote. So that suggests that Democrats are not voting, black Democrats are not voting as heavily for Democrats as they have in the past, at least in California. That's the only state where we've found that to be the case so far.
Leslie Stahl, the Illinois gubernatorial race, in addition to the California race, still out. What a battle between Thompson and Stevens.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. There's been an extremely high turnout in the city of Chicago among traditional Democrats. Goes to show you, again, that the jobs issue and Reaganomics were a huge factor in this race. A race in which the incumbent Republican, Jim Thompson, Big Jim Thompson, was expected to win. But Stevenson talked about Reaganomics and jobs, ginned up the Democrats, got them out to vote. 60% of the people in Illinois said they felt Reaganomics hurt their state.
With Leslie Stahl, this is Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York.
Election night 1982. From CBS News election headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
Well, it's 12:30 a.m. in the East. Looking ahead, still 8 gubernatorial and Senate races to go. But let's look back a little at the message from the voters so far tonight. The House, no question about it, new ball game. The Democrats definitely increased their majority in the House and probably to the point of policy control. They may pick up as many as, say, 29 seats in the House. The Senate, relatively unchanged. Republicans retain control in the Senate, particularly since Wilson has won the race in California. The gubernatorial races, big wins for the Democrats tonight, as expected, but the results are still out in 2 of the biggest of the 10 states up tonight, California, and most surprisingly, the verdict is still out in Illinois. The Democratic leader in the House of Representatives, Representative Thomas P. Tip O'Neill, must be pleased with the results of tonight's balloting. And a smiling Tip O'Neill has just gotten his microphone on and is with Walter Cronkite in Washington. Walter?
Yes, he is a smiling Tip O'Neill tonight. You've got, according to our latest estimate, a gain of 30 seats in the House, much more than you'd anticipated.
Well, you're a little ahead of us. We, when I left the Capitol and talking around the nation to the various members, we had, I think it was 24 and 4. So we're at 20, but you're ahead of us.
We're give or take 6 on that, so it could come down to 24. You've got a bigger margin than some people anticipated you might have coming up in the 93rd Congress now, 98th Congress now. What are you going to do with that? Do you think?
Well, first of all, I'd hate to say on that, you know, the Reagan people, particularly their pollsters, were saying that we were going to lose 40 seats, and we kept saying that we were going to win somewhere between 12 and 15. We were both playing games, to be perfectly truthful. We both put it in the middle at about 50, at about 25, rather. So if we were down 15 or down to 12, we could have claimed a victory. But the interesting thing about it is this. This is double the vote that any party out of power ever got in the second term of a president. The average is 11. So we'll have about 30.
For the first midterm after the president's election.
Right.
Right. With this, are you going to finally find you have no more problem with boll weevils with recalcitrant Democrats?
We didn't have that too much trouble in the last couple of months. As a matter of fact, as we analyzed the boll weevils, there used to be 43 of them that we would count on. And in the last 2 or 3 votes that we had, we lost 26 of them. I think most of them got a message, and there'll be some diehards out there, but I don't think it'll be as severe as it was before.
Jim Baker a little while ago was saying that the president expected a little more difficulty putting his coalition together again, but he anticipated he'd be able to. Baker anticipated he'd be able to.
Well, that's very interesting. I was listening to Jim while you were talking to him. He seemed to be interested in the Senate. They raised all their money because they already controlled the Senate and they wanted to get control of the House. A year ago, they were predicting that they were going to win the House. That's where all their flood of money came. Suddenly, they seem to have had not too bad a defeat out there because currently they've only lost one Democratic senator. But the truth of the matter is that they're going to lose somewhere between 25 and 30 seats, and so they'll have trouble in the House. There's no question about it. I think this is a very, very definite message from the American people. And the House always listens to the will of the American people because they have to come up for election every 2 years. They have to bring the report card before the people.
Would you expect the president to make any moderations in his policy in view of this?
Well, I don't think that as of himself that, or Baker, who didn't believe in the policies of the president when he was with Bush, but now is an ardent supporter of the president's, of course, and is real top key man. He is very reluctant to change anything. He truly believes in his policies. But the interesting thing is that we had a training bill in which we passed in the House and they went to the Senate, and the Senate went down and had to push it down his throat in order to get him to sign that bill. Then he was taking credit for it. When the tax bill came along, Dole said we've got to make some amends on your tax bill. Ultimately, I gave him a hand in the tax bill. The members of the Republican members of the Senate had to cram these things down his throat. And so I think that they'll really read the will of the American people, that too many people were hurt out there, that they do take care of the...
Is this likely to bring government by veto, as the president?
No, I don't think he's. I don't really think he's that type. I think that we can compromise. I think that Senator Baker and Dole and them, I think they'll have enough influence on them to say, listen, politics is the art of compromise. We're going to have to compromise many of the things along the line. No, I would hate to think that there's going to be government by veto.
In close races this year, the Republicans outspent in House races the Democrats $93,000 more than the Democrats on an average. What are you going to do about that in 1984? You can't go on with that kind of disparity, can you?
You know, I've been opposed to this for years. I've been trying to shut it off, but it's a very difficult thing because it is where a coalition works. Some of the senior members on both sides of the aisle do very, very well from those PACs and things like that, and we haven't had much success in curbing it, to be perfectly truthful. It was interesting. You're predicting that we'll win by 30 votes. We have been following in the last 2 weeks, from the statistics that we gather, how much money they have been pouring into the areas, and they had it very, very well documented, those who were in trouble. If they didn't have to throw in 35 to some and 70 to others in the last week, we'd have won 50 seats instead of the 30.
Your fellow Massachusetts Democrat, Senator Kennedy, apparently is winning by a 63% margin tonight, a big win in Massachusetts, but it's 6% below what he did in his last Senate race in '76. Does that indicate that he's got any problem in his race for the presidency?
No, as a matter of fact, very interestingly, he had a fellow that ran against him who spent about $3 million of his own money. Nobody knew who the fellow was. They thought he was an eccentric millionaire, to be perfectly truthful. He offered a reward of $10,000 if Ted would debate him, and they arranged the debate, and they went to the Nazareth School, a school for children, and Shamey showed that he had a little class and a little ability and knew what the government was all about, and
That's the answer.
He looked pretty good.
Tip O'Neill, they went to back in New York. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Walter.
Thank you very much. Good to see you. Dan?
Thank you very much, Walter Cronkite and Tip O'Neill. We'll be back in a moment with more of our CBS News election night coverage. In the New York Senate race, our veteran CBS News correspondent Morton Dean has swooped on that story like a hawk on a rabbit and reports to us that Republican candidate Lou Lehrman is requesting the voting equipment in New York State be impounded and that Lehrman will demand a recount, which he, Lehrman, is convinced he will win. Lehrman correspondent Dean Notes has charged that there have been irregularities, especially in the counting of absentee ballots. Our CBS News estimate is that Mario Cuomo won the New York gubernatorial race with a winning margin of about 51% to Lehrman's 49%. A large voting bloc in New York and elsewhere, 12% of the national vote, it's estimated, comes from black people. In 1980, blacks voted heavily against Ronald Reagan in a losing cause, and they seem to have voted very heavily in today's elections in all sections of the country. Rita Flynn is in Washington with a group of black voters in the nation's capital. Good evening, Rita, and good evening to all of those who've waited so patiently there in the studio with you.
Good evening, Dan. Blacks do seem to be the one clear group in this country that are basically saying it's time to change course. The 4 people we have with us tonight all voted, and they say that they were very, very eager to do so, more so than even they have been in past elections. Let's talk first with Virginia Beverly, excuse me, who is a single mother of 5, depends on a lot of public assistance. When you went into the polling place today, to what extent was Ronald Reagan and Reaganomics on your mind?
Very much. He was very much on my mind.
How so? What were you thinking? Were you casting a vote against him or what?
I was casting a vote against him. I felt that my voice had to be spoken out, as many other blacks, that something was wrong with the way his Reaganomics or his economic plan was going.
Ralph Moore, with us from Baltimore, where he is a community activist and works for a housing aid center. You come into contact constantly with the unemployed. You work in areas where up to 60% of the people are unemployed. To what extent did you notice a sense in the communities as you've been there in the last months or so that people really wanted to go out and vote, the minorities and the blacks, and why?
Well, I was very much surprised, especially in the community where I work that is like 97% black, that on the street level there was a very, very strong sentiment that Ronald Reagan would have to be, and all Republicans actually, would have to be voted against. And I was just surprised because it's a new awareness of the connection between, the electoral process and what's affecting people's daily lives. And I think the Reagan administration helped people, and the Republicans helped people feel that they were making a direct impact on their lives, and so people wanted to turn that back. And so there was a great sentiment, a very, very strong sentiment that something should be done. And I heard people on the street saying, we've got to get rid of those Republicans, any Republicans. It was just a very, very strong sentiment.
Asbury, Mr. Hopewell, whose nickname is Hope, is one of the unemployed. He's just been laid off from Bethlehem Steel and doesn't know when he's going to get to go back to work. We are showing in the CBS poll information that 61% of the blacks who are voting basically say that the #1 issue is unemployment. Was that the #1 issue for you today? And what do you expect is going to change, if anything? What basically are you looking for with what we're seeing as Democratic gains?
That was definitely the main issue for me when I went to the polls today, and I know that it weighs heavily on the minds of other blacks who were employed at Bethlehem Steel and who are now laid off. We have workers there with 20, 25 years experience who are skilled workers. They're laid off. Some of them have lost their homes. Families have broken up. And they felt that there was only one way to change the things that were going on now, and that was to vote and vote opposing Reaganomics.
So basically, though, how do you see that this election is going to change your situation? You're out of work and you haven't been told any indications of when you might get to go back. Do you expect somehow a miraculous change in your own situation? Or?
I don't necessarily expect a miraculous change, but I feel that the change would have to begin with this election and carry over to the election of '84.
Okay. With us also is John Tolbert, who is a real pillar of the community in Leesburg, Virginia, where he's a member of the town council. Mr. Tolbert also owns his own catering firm. Basically, things seem to be going all right for you in your life. When you went into the poll today, into the voting booth, were you thinking of sending a message, and if so, what was it?
Very much so. I thought it was time for a change rather than stay on the course. And I was more impressed by seeing that the senior citizen would not get the cuts in Social Security. That was one of my greatest concerns.
Well, how much was Ronald Reagan on your mind? Were you angry?
On my mind?
Mm-hmm.
I had completely dismissed him from my mind.
Angry at him, basically?
I won't say I was angry, but I just put him aside.
All right.
I think anger was something that existed for many, many black people, though, and I think he was very much on a lot of our minds, and you know, I think there was a great concern that he seems to be the most anti-black president that I can recall, and I'm sure that many, many people can recall.
Yeah. I think people in this room at least were voting their frustrations today when they went to the polls. Back to Dan in New York.
Rita, just before we leave there, the gentleman said that President Reagan was perceived as the most anti-black president in a long, long while. And I'm interested as to why, because I know that with President Reagan, he continually says that he's surprised and very disappointed to hear any black person say that.
Well, of course, Mr. Rather, actions always speak louder than words. And, you know, Ronald Reagan seems to have an incredible tolerance for high unemployment, a 10.1% rate overall nationwide, and yet in the black community it's 20%. He also doesn't seem to have an urban policy, for instance, and most black people live in cities. And in fact, he even tried to propose that the federal government funds were hurting cities, and that was one of his theories that he was trying to send out, and that got repudiated. But I'm just saying, on a lot of different things, even on a lot of the appointments that he's tried to make to various commissions and to government bodies, on this business with the granting tax-exempt status to colleges that discriminate along religious and racial lines and all that kind of thing. There are just a lot of actions that you get a very, very strong impression from Ronald Reagan that he doesn't really care for black people, and that you really can't say that if you're going to be president of the United States, but you can certainly do a lot of things, and we can feel a lot of the messages that are coming across.
No matter what he says to the contrary.
Right. Thank you very much, Rita, and the entire group there. Another key voter block, if you want to talk about blocks tonight, is the blue-collar worker, particularly with the high employment rates in many sections of the nation. In Michigan, where the unemployment rate is 15.9%, that's on a statewide basis. Barry Peterson is with the folks in Willie's Bar in Wyandotte, a suburb of Detroit. Barry?
Well, Dan, there's been some cheering and some sadness here as the voting results have come in. Let me ask, of the people we have here, let's start with Gay Gibbons. Gay, you're a third-generation Democrat. You defected in 1980 to vote for Ronald Reagan, and you're back in the Democratic fold this election. Why?
The Republicans totally failed me. I just don't believe in anything they stand for and hope that Blanchard can do it. Blanchard is a Democrat, and Michigan is failing. We're in desperate straits.
You don't believe Reaganomics will work? You're ready to leave?
Absolutely not. I don't believe in Reaganomics. He's 2 years into the office, and I just don't believe he's done anything. He has not impressed me in any way.
Tom Tolstar, you voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980. You stayed Republican this year. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a shame that the unemployment issue has become a big factor in hurting Reaganomics, because his other policies that he's carried on are coming true, which is lower interest rates and also lowering of taxes. So therefore, I'm sticking with it.
You've got a job. You work for Ford Motor Company. Right. You've got a place to go and work tomorrow morning. How much is that a part of your decision?
It is a factor, but I'm also sticking to the fact that at the turn of the new year, Reaganomics and his issues will come true, and we should have a better year in '83.
Sally Wineclaw, you've got a job too, but you didn't want one. You wanted to be retired by now, and you wanted to be living on your husband's income, but he was laid off a couple of years ago from the Chrysler Motor Company. You voted for Jimmy Carter in 1980, and you stayed Democratic this year. What do you think about Reaganomics, and do you think Ronald Reagan got a message tonight?
Well, he had it for 2 years, and it went downhill. How low can you go?
Phil, Norman, a year and a half without a job, worked in an industry that supplied auto parts, voted for Ronald Reagan in 1980. What about 1982?
Oh, I had a change of heart. I got pretty fed up with him. I thought that continuous business were just around the corner. I don't believe in it anymore. I don't believe in Ronald Reagan. You know, I like the guy, but he's a strong man, but it's, like I say, his policies I can't agree with. But more importantly, I'm hoping very much that the Democrats take this very, very seriously, what's happened tonight. They've gained seats, and I hope they realize that this is an incentive for them. Go get it. We need jobs, and that's what we need. And I hope they don't take this lightly. I hope they don't sit back on their laurels and make deals with the Republicans. I hope they know that this is a time for them to get it, because now I'm completely Democratic. I tell you, we got to change. And as far as I'm concerned, a year and a half out of work, I don't want any more to do with the Republicans any more than I want an eyesore tonight, so I don't want either one.
Okay, I would say of the many people we've talked to at Little Wally's tonight, Dan, what Phil says has been echoed over and over again. Give us jobs. That's what they want from here.
Barry Peterson and Willie's Bar, thank you very much. Order a round of favorite refreshment for everybody there and send the bill to Andrew Rooney, will you? We'll be back in a moment with more CBS News election coverage. Well, something's got to give very soon in those Illinois and California gubernatorial races, but nothing so far. This is Dan Rather at CBS News election headquarters in New York. One politician greatly affected by tonight's Republican results is their leader in the Senate, Senator Howard Baker, one of the more popular Republicans in the Senate on both sides of the aisle in many years. And he's in Huntsville, Tennessee tonight as a guest of Walter Cronkite in Washington. Good evening, Senator Baker. Walter?
Senator, thank you. This is kind of remote control hosting, I must say. I wish we were together. And congratulations, you remain the majority leader of the Senate of the United States, and with a working majority, a very good one. However, you didn't build up that majority, as you yourself said you think that you needed to do if you were going to be fairly secure in 84 and 86. Does that disappoint you?
I guess so, Walter, but you know, everything considered, it's not exactly a banner year for Republicans around the country, and I think it is a remarkable achievement indeed that we apparently have 53 Republican senators and may have 54, depending on the outcome of the race in Nevada, where I understand we're ahead. So altogether, it's really remarkable, I think, and remarkably gratifying that we kept that majority and kept it intact. I would have liked to have added a seat or two, but by any measure, this is the brightest point in this night, the Senate victories as far as Republicans are concerned.
Senator, I'll admit all of this is based on a couple of hours ago, and things sort of shifted better toward your favor in that time. But a little earlier tonight, Bill Moyer said that this was a fight tonight for the soul of the Republican Party. And Bob Dole said, I heard a quote, that he said that Howard Baker was going to have to call some shots in the Senate now on the basis of what he considered something of a mandate from the people regarding mid-course corrections, as it is called in the president's policy. Jack Kemp said it from the other side, we're going to have to get back to fundamentals on the tax cuts and so forth. Do you think you've got to fight for the soul of the Republican Party? Does this election in '82 cause a further schism in the party?
No, I don't think so. On the contrary, I think that what happened in 1982, while it may have been a referendum on Ronald Reagan and his administration, was also a referendum on a very independent and a very separate Republican majority in the Senate. And it's heartwarming to me to see that the country apparently spoke with approval of the contribution the Republican majority in the Senate made to the formulation of policy in this country over the past 2 years. We'll continue to do that. And Bob Dole, chief among them, I think, especially in tax policy, will continue to say his piece, and I will continue to support him. But it is really, I think, the most satisfying thing in my political career to be able to infer from the result tonight that the country perceives and understands that the Republican majority in the Senate is an independent political force, and that we have, in fact, performed in a way that they approve. Now, that's not going to be changed in the next 2 years, and in the next 2 years, we'll have things that we agree with the administration, and on occasion, things that we disagree with. But I expect that, based on the experience we've had so far, that we'll get along a lot better with the White House in that respect than we will with the House of Representatives. My one fear out of this whole thing is that since the country has spoken in two ways, since they have given the Democrats an increased majority in the House and let us keep our Republican majority in the Senate, that will not lead us into 2 years of confrontation. I hope we don't make a political football over great issues that we've got to solve, great problems that we've got to solve in the next 2 years. Social Security comes to mind, defense spending and tax policy, of course, come to mind. But I watched Tip O'Neill a little while ago, and I must say to my friend Tip that You know, we each owe an obligation to the country, in addition to the obligation we owe to our party. And I'm not trying to lecture the Speaker, he knows that, but the one thing we mustn't permit to happen is for the two bodies to be in conflict to the point where we immobilize the functions of the Congress.
You say you hope that will be the situation. Realistically, what do you expect in your relations with the House?
I don't know, Walter. You know, our personal relationship will continue to be very good. I have a fond affection for the Speaker, but I was more disturbed in this campaign by the repeated reference to Social Security by the Speaker, by Jim Wright, by Ted Kennedy and others than perhaps anything else, because it had been my hope, and I'm sure the President's hope, that we could depoliticize that issue and move together to try to solve that. But it became a very distinct political football, and I hope that doesn't signal what's going to happen in the future. So I reiterate, I hope that doesn't happen, but I can't honestly tell you I'm sure it won't happen.
Senator, I'm sorry, New York's asking for it back, so our Huntsville-Washington visit has to be brought to an end. Thank you very much.
Come back. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Walter and Senator Baker. This is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York.
Election night 1982. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 1 a.m. in the East, and all told, tonight's Senate, House, and gubernatorial races with two big state houses, Illinois and California, still to be decided, were to add up to a nationwide referendum on Reaganomics. So, what has happened? The results we have, a mixed decision from the voters. It would be hard to make a case that President Reagan won't have to modify his economic policy on the basis of what happened tonight, but the Democrats don't seem to have piled on enough to make him outright reverse it. The elements of the mix on the House side, this was the one place where detractors of Reaganomics got mad and voted to get even. A big win in the House tonight for the Democrats any way you cut it. We think that the Democrats will pick up something on the order of maybe 27 Senate seats, give or take, say 5. The Senate story, not much change from the present Senate. Some, for the most part, a good night for the incumbents of both parties. The Democrats picked up one Senate seat, a net gain for them of one Senate seat. And Republicans keep Senate control. In the governorships, the Democrats had a good night here, too. But remember, California and Illinois are still out. Whichever party wins those two races will have had a very good night. With that in mind, the Democrats picked up 7 state houses. They lost one, a big gain of 6 in the state houses so far. But let's try to catch up on the late results. First, in the Senate, Bob Schieffer.
Dan, we have one Senate race that we have not called, and that was out in Hawaii. Matsunaga has won as expected. This was perhaps the safest seat in all the Senate. His opponent there, Mr. Brown, spent $300 to get the Republican nomination and said that's enough. He refused to spend 1 cent in the general election, and Matsunaga, a very popular senator, won. He's also a liberal, and it has been a very good night for liberal senators. Remember, Dan, back in 1980, this was the year that all the Republicans were saying that the liberals would lose in 82. They'd pick off the rest of the liberals. Well, let's look at how the liberals have done tonight. Liberal senators have won going away. And about this point, I expected we'd see a little graphic that was going to show all that, but there must be a good reason for not seeing it. Be that as it may, liberal senators have won. People like Regal out in Michigan, people like Sarbanes in Maryland, all those people that were supposed to be 2 years ago targets of the conservatives, the Nick-Pack people, were supposed to lose. They all won tonight.
Bob, I'm reminded that Spark Matsunaga, the incumbent Democratic senator in Hawaii, that war veteran, came to Washington when he was first elected, and that Russell Long almost immediately created a subcommittee for him called Tourism and Sugar, and somebody said, whatever happened to the pineapples? But he's a very popular senator, as is shown by the result there, and it was not an unexpected result. Leslie Stahl, you have 2 big, close races. Jerry Clower, the Southern humorist, tells a story about, it's too long to tell, but it finally ends with a punchline. Listen, shoot up here amongst us. One of us got to have some relief. And you have to think that they're feeling that way in Illinois and California, the candidates in both of those races.
Well, these races may also provide some relief for the White House, although CBS News estimates say they're both still too close to call. But let's first look at the vote in California. Tom Bradley, the mayor of Los Angeles, with 10% of the precincts reporting, with about 43% of the vote. George Deukmejian, the Attorney General of California, with 57% of the vote at this time. This was expected to be close in the final days of the campaign, but let me tell you, there's some bad signs for Bradley in our exit polls. Bradley is running behind where Jerry Brown won last time amongst traditional Democrats in areas where he would have to roll up large margins, for example, in Los Angeles and the other big cities and in the Bay Area. And Deukmejian is running ahead where the Republican was last time in Southern California and the suburbs. Yes?
Leslie, forgive me for interrupting, but very good news for the Republicans. In Missouri, Senator John Danforth appears to have pulled it out against a very tough Democratic opponent, Harriet Woods, so-called give 'em hell Harriet Woods. She ran a Harry Truman kind of campaign, blunt, direct, took it to John Danforth. A lot of Republicans thought this one was sayonara and goodbye, but our CBS News estimate is that Danforth will, after all is said and done, will have won it with a margin of about 51%. Well, Bob Schieffer, there's another cause for celebration on the part of the Republicans.
It certainly is, and here's another surprise, Dan. On a night when women have been voting for Democrats around the country, we've talked a lot about this gender gap. Harriet Woods did not do as well among women as other Democrats did throughout the evening. She carried the women's vote, 52 to 47%, but in other races around the country, Democratic candidates got a bigger vote from women. I don't know how to explain that yet, but that's what the exit polls tell us.
We'll come back to the why of that later on. Very interesting race out there. Now, Leslie, we'd like to continue with the governors.
Let me just say one more thing about California. If Tom Bradley loses, analysts will be trying to figure out whether there was a hidden anti-black vote out there. Deukmejian was behind until his campaign manager went public with the notion that there might be a hidden anti-black vote. Deukmejian fired him for saying that, but from that point on, he started to rise in the polls. And it'll be days before we can figure it out, but that may or may not have been a factor in that race if Bradley loses. Okay, next let's look at Illinois, which again CBS News is saying is too close to call. With 75% of the precincts in, Stevenson has a slight lead. However, here again, we have gotten returns in from Chicago, from the city, where large numbers of Democrats have poured out. However, we have not gotten returns from the more Republican areas around the city in the so-called collar counties, the suburban counties of DuPage, Kane, and Lake. And with those late returns in, this may tip it the other way for Stevenson later in the evening. Unemployment is very high in Illinois, 12.5%, and Stevenson, who made many mistakes in his campaign, as we've talked about, bringing up the whole WIMP issue, was not expected to win, but he is doing well. But when those suburban Republican votes come in, it may turn the other way. We've been talking about the importance of governor's races to the presidential campaign in 1984. A sitting governor can offer his party a built-in organization for that campaign. And so it's important to look at the Big Ten and see how those big races with the large electoral votes are going. So far, 3 of the Big Ten states have shifted from Republican to Democrat tonight: Ohio, Michigan, and Texas. When the Republicans had 6 of these states going in, as of now they only have 2, but again they stand to pick up or to hold on in Illinois and could take over in California. So as you've been saying, it could even be a mixed message in the end about the governor's races if California and Illinois go Republican, as well as Pennsylvania. So some of the big states will still be in Republican hands.
George Deukmejian, the Republican gubernatorial candidate in California, it was an especially tough race for Tom Bradley, and we haven't called the race yet, in that Deukmejian in many ways took away part of Bradley's strength, and that Deukmejian is so strong on the law and order anti-crime issue.
Well, but you know, the voters of California were telling pollsters, the way voters elsewhere were, that unemployment and the economy were their major concern and not crime. So it's hard to tell what was the determining factor, but then again, it's really a close race. It isn't just that CBS News is finding it difficult to name a winner. It's a truly close race out there.
But as we've tried to drive home all evening long, we pride ourselves on being careful and cautious.
One other thing, Dan, Jerry Brown, Deukmejian tried to link Bradley and Brown. Many of his ads promoted that notion that a vote for Bradley was giving you the same old administration that you've had. And with Jerry Brown losing as badly as he did, this too could have been a big factor.
Bruce Morton, while Democrats in the House had a very good night of it in the South, as well as in some other sections of the country, there was one disappointment for them below the Mason-Dixon line.
There was indeed, Dan, in Mississippi's 2nd District, that's the Delta, Greenville, Mississippi, that part of the state. State legislator named Robert Clark had hoped to become the first black to go from Mississippi to Congress since Reconstruction. He failed. He lost to Republican Webb Franklin. Leslie talked about whether race was an issue in the California gubernatorial election. That's the question here, too. The district is black in population, but the majority of the registered voters are white. Clark needed white support. He got endorsements from the state's white political establishment, but clearly he didn't get enough white votes to win. Webb Franklin's slogan, "The One for Us," led some people to speculate maybe that was racism. Franklin and the Republicans denied it. But elsewhere in the South, some very interesting results for the Democrats. In North Carolina, Democratic incumbent Ike Andrews was just absolutely supposed to lose to William Colby. Andrews was suffering from a drunk driving arrest. It was felt he'd been in Congress a little long, lost touch with the district. And as you can see, he's won. He's pulled that out. Elsewhere in North Carolina, Robin Britt, a Democratic attorney, upset Republican freshman Gene Johnston. The Republicans picked up a total of 2 Democratic seats in North Carolina, and in all those races, Jesse Helms's congressional club was supporting Republican incumbents, supporting Republican challengers. Helms put his prestige on the line in North Carolina and lost decisively. In Birmingham, Alabama, where the steel mills are shut fast and unemployment is very high, Albert Lee Smith, a new right freshman Republican, lost to County Commissioner Ben Erdrich. That's, again, an election where the social issues worked in 1980 and didn't this time because the only thing on anybody's mind in that part of the South was jobs. So Erdrich will come to Congress. Finally, we've got to say one thing that we got wrong early in the evening. In the 3rd District in Indiana, John Hyler, the Republican whom we said was a loser, looks embarrassingly like a winner now. We've called it wrong. As you can see there, with 94% of the precincts reporting, Hyler has come back and now has 51% of the vote. We're sorry.
Well, absolutely. And, Bruce, I think we need to say that when you go through an evening like tonight with so many races, we are sorry. We hate it when that happens, but it happens very rarely on CBS News coverage. It does happen. And, as you say, especially to the candidates involved, we apologize. We'll be back in a moment with more of our CBS News election night coverage. If you like politics, if you like things close, take a look at this. Yes, it's been a long evening. There's some very exciting and important races still out there. The Senate race in Nevada. Howard Cannon, the veteran Democratic incumbent in Nevada, still in a very close race, but trailing as he has been for much of the night. This is votes actually in and tabulated. 33% of the precincts in and counted in Nevada. The Democratic incumbent, Howard Cannon, is trailing the Republican challenger, the department store man, Jacob Chick Hecht. Hecht leading with 33% of the precincts reporting by about 55% to 45%. That one simply too close to call. The Republicans hoping that they could beat Howard Cannon. Senator Bob Packwood of Oregon, who led the Senate campaign, always thought that they could win in Nevada. It's still open. Now, in the gubernatorial races, in the California governor's race, that's Tom Bradley. In the race with George Deukmejian, 11% of the precincts reporting. These are actual votes now. 11% of the precincts reporting from California. And Bradley is trailing Deukmejian. This one could go in for a very long time yet. Remember that Jerry Brown has lost out there to Pete Wilson in the Senate race. Bradley trails Deukmejian. In Illinois, that race, a really tough race, and what an exciting race. Illinois famous for close races. Many people counted Stevenson out of this one, but with 76% of the precincts reporting, Adlai Stevenson III, former United States Senator, trying to become governor of Illinois, is leading the incumbent Republican governor, Jim Thompson, by about 52% to 48%. Thompson trying to win an unprecedented 3rd consecutive term as the Illinois governor. Very, very close there. And in Nebraska, a race that we haven't talked about a lot, that's true. But a in this Nebraska race, the incumbent Republican, Governor Thone. He knew he was going to have trouble with the wounded Vietnam veteran Carey. Carey is a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. Look at this race. Carey, the Democratic challenger, threatening to unseat a Republican incumbent in Nebraska. So very, very close out there. Now, in addition to all the candidates being decided on this election day, voters cast ballots on 52 statewide initiatives, the most since 1932 and among the biggest total ever. The biggest issue among those initiatives, a freeze on nuclear arms. 9 states and the District of Columbia had that issue on their ballots. It's to be decided by an overall 10% of the electorate. At this hour, the issue is leading in Massachusetts, in New Jersey, in North Dakota, Rhode Island, and the District of Columbia. Never have so many Americans had the opportunity to express themselves at the polls directly on a foreign policy issue. I remind you, of course, that the outcome of those votes is not binding, but could be very important as we go along the next 2 years. Bill Moyers, the voters have been sending these signals. We said at the beginning of the evening this would be a referendum on Reaganomics, among other things. What have the voters told us?
Well, they said, first of all, it takes a tidal wave to get rid of incumbents. Incumbents have done very well tonight. Only 2% of the Democratic incumbents are losing, and about 20% of the Republican incumbents are losing. And many of these were elected 2 years ago on Ronald Reagan's coattails by margins of less than 5%. Even so, overall, of the 383 incumbents in the House, 340 are winning. Being an incumbent is a very big help. I think it's saying, Dan, that the country is continuing to move left, right, and center simultaneously. The voters are saying we're a nation deeply concerned about our economy, but deeply divided about how to try to turn it around. Our exit poll data continues to show that more voters are saying to our pollsters, stay the course, that are saying change the course, even while they're voting for Democrat. They seem to be saying that they want Ronald Reagan on the bridge of the ship. They want the ship of state in his hands, but those in the water want Democrats to throw them a life rope. I think the most important indication of what's happening in the country is right here in New York. That race between 2 distinctly different men of different philosophies, both men of great intelligence. Mario Cuomo, a traditional New Deal, Great Society liberal. Louis Lerman, who set himself apart from Ronald Reagan and said we need to go farther than Ronald Reagan and be different from Ronald Reagan, have been locked in a very close race, which Lerman is going to challenge. I think the meaning of that is what's happening in the country. We don't know what to do about the economy. We're deeply divided over it. And being deeply divided, we take a little here, we take a little there, we keep the balance of power divided among the different parties, among the different branches of government. We're a country that is looking for its way. Certain there are icebergs out there as the ship of state makes its way through the choppy waters. Not sure where to turn, so we're asking a lot of people for different help. It's a confused country. It's a country that doesn't want to make great changes, but knows that deep changes are necessary, but are uncertain what they are.
And you think one of the battle lines very quickly when the new Senate, which will be again in control of the Republicans with a slightly reduced majority in the Senate, a new House of Representatives where the Democrats' hand has been strengthened, that the battle line will be on whether to cut defense spending, and if so, by how much?
Well, I'm very impressed with a man named John Sears, whom you know is a Republican strategist and a former campaign manager for Ronald Reagan. And he wrote a fascinating piece recently in which he said the voters of this country are a very pragmatic bunch of people. And he said what they really want are some pragmatic ways to deal with our fundamental problems. I think the real battle in the next 2 years is going to be over whether the political system in Washington can function pragmatically to move the country out of this tough spot we're in, or whether it's going to be politics as usual, not pragmatism, but conflict, no compromise, everybody posturing, trying to blame one another for the difficulty we're in. It's been a very, very unsettling time for people who think that politics should be more than saying, yeah, you're one too, and should be trying to resolve our differences in an effort to move ahead. That's going to be the battle in the next 2 years.
And won't that be the maximum test of Ronald Reagan as president? Whether he can do something along the lines of what President Dwight Eisenhower did in the 50s. Dwight Eisenhower sometimes had a Senate majority. A lot of times he didn't. For a short while, he had control of the House. Most of the time, he didn't. But he led the country through a rather peaceful valley for most of the 50s, while by taking the high road of let's work it out, let's see what's best for the country, can't we compromise?
Yes, and he had in Lyndon Johnson in the Senate and Sam Rayburn in the House, two Democrats of commanding stature who were willing to compromise and play the game the way it has to be played to get things done. Then politics is a lot of fun. We've had a great time, but this country is in really serious trouble. I think that's what the message tonight is. Everybody's saying we're in serious trouble. We've got to do something about it. John Sears said 6 months from now, he thinks it will be difficult for even liberals and conservatives to tell what they are and why. And that the majority of voters are saying to them, forget your labels, forget your ideologies, and for God's sakes, get together and try to do something about this sinking ship of state.
Well, Morton Dean, as you know, Bill, has been watching the races in the East from Boston, where he finds that the incumbents, the always well-heeled incumbents, had by far the best of it.
Well, Dan, it's sort of late in the night, so I wonder if I can be excused for drawing a parallel between political incumbency and chicken soup. It seems that political incumbency is a cure for all sorts of ills. And while we're emphasizing the changes that have taken place in the East, we can also emphasize those changes that did not take place. It was a better day for Senate incumbents this year than in the past 3 senatorial elections, 76, 78, and 80. This year, 10 incumbent senators ran, and 10 won. And the winners include the 5 Republican senators who were seeking a return trip to Washington. It's worth noting, though, that 2 of the moderate Republicans barely survived. A little history lesson tells us that Lowell Weicker in Connecticut last time out received 57.7% of the vote. This time, the CBS estimate indicates he'll end up with only 51%. Now, the Weicker history, past and present, was mirrored absolutely in Rhode Island. Chafee, the Rhode Island Republican incumbent, also ended up with 51% of the vote.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but our time is up. Got to go. See you later. This is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. Well, we don't like to cut Morton Dean off as we had to do there. For those of you who may have just joined us, Morton Dean was saying from Boston, where he's been watching all of these races, that the incumbents, the very well-financed incumbents, did extremely well. Mort, we want to go to Bernard Goldberg in the South, but having cut you off so precipitously there, if we would try to get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Bernie, we've talked a lot about the tactics of tonight's races. You've been watching things from there in Atlanta. The black vote, the unemployment issue, the tactics used by the Democrats to try to get both of those things working for them. What other factors that we haven't discussed yet that you think we should?
Well, let me ask you a question, Dan, first. You covered politics in the South for a long time, right?
Yes, I did.
And was the courthouse in Havana part of the territory while you were down there?
Yes, indeed it was.
Well, it is again tonight. Call it the Cuban connection, the Fidel factor, call it whatever you want. But
no, for
Fidel
exactly
Castro,
that reason. It has been for a long time.
Fidel Castro is a major issue in 2 southern races. First in the Florida governor's race, where memories of the Mariel boat lift are still fresh and still bitter.
April 1980, Fidel Castro decides to test America by shipping thousands of mental patients and criminals to the U.S. Jimmy Carter agrees to the unrestricted boat lift. Florida is staggered by the flood of 125,000 refugees. Governor Bob Graham stands by silently as Castro determines Florida's future.
Of course, Cubans are a major issue in Florida, but the Fidel factor also surfaced much further north in Tennessee, in Robin Beard's aggressive campaign to unseat Democratic Senator James Sasser.
Sasser has voted to allow foreign aid to be sent to committed enemies of our country. Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Marxist Angola, and even communist Cuba. You can bet James Sasser's making a lot more friends abroad than he is here in Tennessee.
Muchísimas gracias, Señor Sasser.
Well, the Fidel factor didn't prove to be much of a factor tonight, Dan. Both Republicans who ran those TV ads lost, and as of now, we have no word from Havana. Hasta luego, Dan.
Well, Bernie, as usual, I was being a little cautious there in the beginning, but it's certainly true that for a long time, even back in the 60s, the courthouse in Havana was a factor in Southern politics. That's when the great waves of refugees from Havana first began. They came, then they subsided, and of course, in the last several years, another wave came along. Out in the Midwest, the economy continues to be the big issue. Bob Simon in Chicago has been watching that close Illinois governor's contest. What a race out there, Bob.
Dan, the remarkable thing is that, it's always gratifying when people don't behave quite the way all our elaborate machines say they will. And Senator Stevenson sensed that. I spent an evening with him last week, and this is when the polls were saying that Thompson was just going to walk away with it. And Stevenson, who was a very modest man, did not say, the polls are wrong, I'm going to win. He was just sort of scratching his head and saying, I might not behave like an Illinois pol, but at the same time, I've been around the track once or twice before, and what I'm reading in the polls, what I'm reading in the papers just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in terms of what I'm feeling, and what I'm feeling is pretty good, and I think I'm going to do pretty well. And he was confused by the polls, and for whether he wins or loses tonight, he's certainly done an awful lot better than anyone thought he would. Generally, I think the most interesting conclusion out of the Midwest, even though it's hardly surprising, is that union members, blue-collar workers have, by and large, returned to the Democratic fold. These are the people who deserted the Democrats in such large numbers in 1980 to vote for Ronald Reagan. Well, they're going back to the Democrats. Twice as many union members today voted Democrat as Republican. Another conclusion out here is the utter disenchantment of blacks with the Reagan administration. When asked whether they would stay the course, 8% of blacks in the Midwest said yes. Also, the farm vote was extremely Democratic tonight, more so than it's been in an awfully long time. If you look at Nebraska, which is often considered to be the most Republican state in the nation, look at the race that Bob Kerrey is giving to Governor Thone. And this is an area where President Reagan went himself to prop up Governor Thone, and so far it doesn't seem to have been terribly effective. Another feature in the Midwest is the tendency of people to stick with candidates who've done a good job for them in the past. Durenberger did carry the day in Minnesota, despite the $7 million campaign waged by Dayton, and Danforth won in Missouri, despite the very energetic campaign of Harriet Woods.
Bob,
Dan?
thank you very much. This is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York.
Election night, 1982. From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, here again is Dan Rather.
It is 1:30 a.m. in the East. One of the more remarkable scenes of the campaign 1982 just completed was the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, going out to Peoria, Illinois, to try to pull out a race for the Republican leader in the House, Bob Michel. And at one point, the President was speaking for Michel, a big rally, and across the way in the distance, across the river, people could see the oil drum fires and the tents of people out of work, ringing the big Caterpillar plant there, people who saying we're out of work, and in some cases our unemployment has run out. It was one of the more remarkable scenes of the campaign. Long, tough battle for a House seat out there. Bob Michel, the Republican leader, gets to keep his House seat. He wins it, and he gets to keep his nickname, Unbeatable Bob. He does not become the House Majority Leader, which is the title, of course, he wanted, but no one can doubt that Michel will take it. Now, Michel outspent his Democratic opponent in that House race in and around Peoria, Illinois, by around 4-1. Mike Wallace has been watching just these kinds of races. Mike, a lot of the money spent tonight did no good. It did Michel some good, but in a lot of races, it didn't bring home a winner.
Name of this story is Money Didn't Work. Minnesota. David Durenberger, the incumbent Republican, spent $3.4 million out there. But as you have remarked during the evening, young Mark Dayton, the Democrat, who wanted that job so badly, spent $6.9 million. 6.9 against 3.4, and 6.7 of that 6.9, if you can follow me, was his own money. It didn't work. Here in New York, unless Lou Lehrman on the recount overturns Mario Cuomo spent something under $5 million, 4.7. Lou Lehrman spent at least 12.5. Somebody says 13, somebody says 15, but at least 12 to 12.5 million. Apparently that 12.5 million did not work. 5 million for Mario Cuomo did. In Texas, you've been using a figure all night of 15 million for Governor Clements. Because you come from Texas, I got to believe that you have the right figure. I've been hearing 12 to 13 during the campaign. Mark White, the Democrat, who won, spent only half that amount, or less than half that amount. So there is $30 to $35 million that did not work in just those 3 races, against probably half that amount from the people who won those races.
Well, Mike, one reason that the $15 million figure is used in Texas, I know it sounds incredible, but I do believe it to be close to the mark, is that Governor Clements, who wound up losing, could feel it sort of slipping away, and he reached into his pocket, symbolically speaking, and took a couple rubber bands off of more money. Keep in mind that Governor Clements is, as I said earlier, a unit player, that his personal wealth is tremendous, and poured it into a television campaign to try to pull it out over Mark White. It didn't succeed. Bill Plant, our White House correspondent, with most of the results in. Bill is at the White House. Bill, how are they reading things at the White House?
Well, Dan, I think they had a bit of a scare earlier this evening when it appeared that they would be losing on the high side in the House races. And they didn't quite know what to make of that because their own projections didn't show it. They still may be higher than what they originally thought, but won't be quite as bad as it was. They're very relieved, needless to say, that they still have a majority in the Senate. Now, as you know, the president did a lot of campaigning, Dan, and as one of his oldest advisors said to me not long ago, Ronald Reagan has no coattails. And you could certainly make a case for that tonight, because a lot of the people for whom he campaigned didn't make it. We could run down the list, but I know it's late, and I thought maybe you'd like to talk about a couple of other things, too. By the way, I'm pretty sure that by now, Mr. Reagan is comfortably asleep.
Thank you very much, Bill. And he went to sleep knowing that he won the California Senate race at least, and we all know how important he felt that was. On Capitol Hill, Phil Jones, now that we have a feeling for the new Senate and the House of Representatives, there's a lot of talk floating around, well, it's going to be a little more liberal than it was before. Some say, no, it'll wind up being more conservative. What do you think?
Well, I tell you what I will say, based on our polling that we did on all the challengers, and we're going to compare them to the current Congress. And we are getting a picture at this hour as to what we can expect. For example, on the question of whether or not the 3rd year of the Reagan tax cut should be canceled, the current Congress, according to our polling, showed about 42% of the members were in favor of canceling that. Now, this new Congress, based on a pickup for the Democrats of about 28 seats or so, as we have been projecting here, shows that about 48% of them favor cancellation of the 3rd year of the tax cut. In another area, we see the nuclear freeze. Now, the old Congress had a slight majority opposed to any nuclear freeze with the Soviet Union at the current levels. But as we have seen in our polling with the new members of Congress, this Congress will have a strong majority, about 54% of those who will be headed to Washington favoring a nuclear freeze. On several issues such as abortion, school prayer, whether or not there should be a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget, ERA, opposition to a nuclear freeze, all these subjects where Ronald Reagan has known positions. Previously, in the old Congress, we found about 123 members of the current Congress felt the same as Ronald Reagan did. Looking at the new Congress coming to town, we find that there are only 104. So that gives you an idea of the attitude changes that will occur. Just a couple of final observations. I have heard all of you talking about the relationship that will occur here now and whether it will be changed, whether or not there will be a pragmatic view by the Democrats and Republicans that there are some very serious issues that have to be dealt with. I think that you're going to see some of this, but you've got to remember, it's just 2 years until the presidential election. And regardless of the numbers here tonight, you could have expected the contention going between the Democrats and Republicans being much more severe than it has been in the last 2 years. And also, I think that you'll have to remember, too, that the Republicans in the Senate, at least, are going to be looking at the message here tonight, and they will know that just 2 years from now, there will be more Republicans up for re-election than Democrats, and they're going to be listening to themselves a lot more than they are to the White House. Dan?
On what issue, Phil, if you had to pick one issue that the president will remain strong with this new Senate and the new House, what might that be?
I would say that he is still going to have support in cutting the budget. But I think he is going to have to come along with some deeper cuts in defense spending in order to get more of the social cuts. But I think he'll still find a general attitude here that something has to be done to bring the deficits down, and that we're going to have to slash federal spending even more.
Still watching furnace-hot races in the gubernatorial races in Nebraska, California, Illinois, and that Senate race in Nevada. We'll have more CBS News coverage of Election Night 1982 in a moment. There are a lot of bad things about politics. One of the good things about politics is in the drama that we have that somebody wins, somebody loses, and unlike a lot of stories in life, politics has a clear-cut ending. Let's take a look at the winners and losers. First in the Senate, Bob Schieffer.
Okay, Dan, as you know, 33 Senate races, 1/3 of the Senate up tonight, and here's the way it looked at the start of the evening. Here's where the Senate races were. Tonight, the Democrats won 20, the Republicans won 12, and we still have one undecided. Here's the way it breaks down. Remember, the Democrats started the evening with those on the left of your screen, the ones surrounded in blue. They held on to these, and they lost Virginia. Actually, that was an independent seat, but that was Harry Byrd, who voted with the Democrats to organize the Senate. So that is counted as a Democratic loss. Still to be decided, of course, Nevada. The Republicans started with 13. They held on to these. They lost New Jersey, and they lost New Mexico. It was a great night for incumbents, Dan. There's just no other way to put it. In the Senate, 28 of 30 incumbents were running. If Cannon should lose in Nevada, that one seat still to be decided, he'd be only one of 2 incumbents in the Senate that lost tonight.
Leslie Stahl, nobody's cried uncle yet in the Illinois gubernatorial race, in the California race, and out there in Nebraska, Kerry and Thone still locked hard at it.
But we do have a winner in Hawaii, the incumbent Democrat George Ariyoshi, winning with less than 50% of the vote, according to our estimate. The anti-incumbent vote, he was considered vulnerable, was split between the Republican Andy Anderson and the independent Frank Fozzie, former mayor of Honolulu. George Ariyoshi winning re-election, a Democrat in Hawaii. Let's look at the whole picture. We have 36 races up in the governor's contests. And so far tonight, Democrats have won in 24 of those, Republicans in 7, and 5 still remain undecided, including California and Illinois. This is how it breaks down. 20 Democratic state houses up for re-election tonight. The Democrats have held on, and all the ones in blue on the left, and they have lost only in New Hampshire. Republicans control state houses in 16 up for re-election tonight. They have held on in the ones in red, but they have lost in Arkansas, Michigan, Minnesota, Nevada, Wisconsin, Texas, and Ohio. That ends up with the Democrats having a net gain of 6 state houses. When we started the evening, well, we won't do that. This is a big net gain for the Democrats, though. Six states. Oh, here we go. Let's look. At the beginning of the evening, Democrats controlled 27 of the 50 state houses, Republicans 23. 5 are still undecided, but so far, Democrats now control 31 state houses and Republicans 14. Dan, let me just tell you quickly about Illinois. We could be here for 3 days. Apparently, some of the punch cards got soaked in some bad weather in Cook County, and they're not going to be able to count those punch cards maybe until tomorrow, maybe the day after. These are Cook County suburban votes, and they could well be Thompson votes because that's Republican territory. We may not know the winner by the end of tonight.
But at our last count, these races not called. Kerry, the Democratic challenger, leading the Republican incumbent Thone in Nebraska.
But very close.
Stevenson was leading in the vote count over Thompson in Illinois. Very close. Duke Majan leading Bradley in the actual vote count in California, but very, very close.
And Idaho, we have an incumbent Democrat, John Evans, in a real horse race against the lieutenant governor, a Republican, Philip Batt. Still another one not called.
All right, Bruce Morton, as my late friend Morris Frank used to say, let's go to the House of Representatives and let's look them over.
The only member of the leadership, Dan, who was in any trouble was Bob Michael of Illinois, the Republican leader. And as you mentioned a few minutes ago, despite all of the ravages of falling farm prices and layoffs at the big Caterpillar plant in Peoria, Michael won, so he'll be back to take charge of the Republicans. Beat a labor lawyer named Doug Stevens, who had a lot of organized labor support, but that fell short. And Michael, just a few minutes ago, claimed victory, and we may have that.
We listen campaign to what the people have been talking about, and then we'll have an opportunity to speak on those occasions in the Congress and with our president, with our administration. And I think there'll be some things we'll obviously have to tell them about whether or not we adjust to some degree the direction in which we've been going. But I'd like to think that we're on the right track if we just keep our heads on straight.
Well, that's a happy Bob Michael. Maybe not as happy as he would be if the Republicans had done better overall, but still. The House of Representatives, when we started this evening, the current House that is, looked this way. 243 Democrats, 192 Republicans. According to our CBS News estimate, when all the votes are counted, and they're not yet, the new House will look like this. 269 Democrats, 166 Republicans. That's a gain of 26 for the Democrats, down a bit from our earlier estimates. 26 plus or minus 5. Still a substantial change, Dan, which will leave the Democrats with a lot more influence on policy than they had last time around.
Thank you, Bruce, and we'll be back with more of our CBS News election coverage in a moment. Well, Bill Moyers has been with us through this evening, and Bill, I find myself thinking as we come down fairly close to the end in terms of having things decided, although we still have these very close races, including the Illinois and California gubernatorial races outstanding, that like a lot of other things in life, it comes down to money. God made us free, but the vote made us equal. But when you have these kinds of dollar signs floating around an election, I can't believe it's healthy.
Something has to change on that, Dan. I think, as Judge Skelly Wright of the appellate court said the other day, the founding fathers would be absolutely horrified at what's happened to the democratic process because of the infusion of large amounts of money. I think in trying to sum it up, you know, with a BLT, a big, large thought, that's going to elude us tonight. The most practical point you can say is that what we did today, about a third of the voting age population, was to go out and elect the men and women to send down to Washington to fight some very difficult battles for us over the next 2 years. I don't think ideology was a big factor. I don't think certainty about where we ought to go is a big factor. I just simply, it's an arbitrary device for choosing who's going to go into the arena of Washington and try to resolve these outfits, these conflicts. Our colleague from Yale University, Ed Tufte, was saying to me a minute ago that the surprise issue tonight, and it illustrates what I'm talking about, was Social Security, running second to unemployment as the important issue in deciding votes. And that issue cut sharply. Much of the Democratic gain in the House tonight results from fears among the elderly about Social Security. But what to do about Social Security is one of the most vexing problems we've elected these men and women to deal with in the next 2 years. And it exemplifies, I think, that whole range of issues that faces this nation. The problem is, and this is not an original thought with me, is that we don't have any money. We don't have enough money anymore, or it seems, to pay for what people call the good, the generous society. So as resources become more limited, nastier and nastier fights are held over a shrinking resource, that ability to pay for what we want. And so what we've done tonight is to say to 434 men and women in the House and 100, we've elected 33 tonight in the Senate, all right, you go in there and wrestle it out, you and Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and Howard Baker, and you see what you can do about taking this pie and cutting it up in ways that are equitable. That's what it's all about.
Bob Schieffer, as you look over the returns from these Senate races, the Nevada Senate race may not be decided for days. What do you find yourself thinking about the central message out of it?
Well, I think one message that we haven't talked about, Dan, and we ought to talk about is that negative campaigns didn't work very well this go-around. These NICPAC campaigns, going into these states and running negative ads early on, people coming in from out of state, that was just an all-round flop this year.
And NICPAC wasn't the only one running them. Some of the
That's
labor
exactly
PACs
right.
ran
In
them as well.
1980, don't forget, a lot of people got caught and got beat because of that. The candidates this year followed the strategy followed by Tom Eagleton of Missouri, who in 1980 was one of the few incumbents who, when NICPAC or negative ads went in against him, immediately rebutted them, went on television with ads of his own to rebut it. All of the other candidates in 80 tried to ignore it for a while and then discovered it was too late. This year, in all of these races, when NICPAC went in, the incumbents or whoever the Democrat was, in most cases they were Democrats, they immediately rebutted them, and it paid off. Another thing, Dan, that ought to be talked about tonight, and that is that the Republicans had a tough time of it out there. We not only had, they did manage to retain control of the Senate, but they won 12 races tonight in the Senate. 6 of those races they won by 53% or less. They won only one race that I can find on the board by 60%. That was Hines in Pennsylvania.
Bruce Morton, we've got just a short time before we need to break, but any of the BLT that Bill Moyer's talked about, big last thoughts?
No, you come back to money again. You know, the Republicans didn't do badly tonight. They did quite well in the Senate. They did worse than they'd hoped in the House, but not by much. But you have to think that in a lot of those races, their high technology, their better money made the difference. This could have been a really bad night if they'd been on even money terms with the Democrats.
Leslie Stahl, in 10 seconds or less, any of those big last thoughts?
Well, governor's races really tell us what people are wanting to talk about for the next 2 years. It won't be taxes, as it was in the last mid-year election. It'll be jobs, infrastructure, high tech. A lot of moderates won in the governor's races. A lot of young people won. 6 governors under 45 years of age. 2 women lost. That'll tell you what kind of politician is going to be coming up through the ranks in the country in the next 2 years.
With Leslie Stahl, this is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters. And so tonight, a look back at our opening question. How would this midterm election shape up and shake out as a nationwide referendum on Reaganomics? Tonight's answers perhaps ought to produce some soul searching within both of the parties. The lesson for Democrats: the voters said no to their memories of the recent past record of Democrats, and they still blame Democrats' past records for some of the ills of the present. The lesson for Republicans: perhaps the voters are nervous about the present and future course of the Reagan administration, unemployment and Social Security in particular. The voters sent a message tonight to both parties, and the winners in both tonight face tough decisions as the voters continue to face tough times. This is Dan Rather at CBS News Election Headquarters in New York. Thank you for joining us. Good night.
From CBS News Election Headquarters in New York, this has been Election Night 1982.